Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're so thrilled that you've made time to join us this morning for our Sustainable Sport in Action webinar, where we will be turning principles into practice. We're thrilled to have up over 260 folks that registered this morning, so we'll just give folks a minute or two to get into the room, and we'll get started right away because we have a wonderful and packed agenda for you. So again, welcome as you come into the virtual room. My name is Elizabeth Gamble, and I am delighted to be your facilitator for today's session. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue. Je m'appelle Elizabeth Gamble et je suis ravie d'animer cette séance intitulée Le sport durable en action, des principes à la pratique. I'm especially excited to moderate this session because it truly sits at the intersection of two areas that have really shaped my life in meaningful ways, sport and sustainability. We get started here and head on to our next slide. Rachel, my wonderful tech support, you'll notice an image on the slide on the right-hand side. That is my 14-year-old son, Jonah, in net. And we actually just got back from spending the weekend in Salmon Arm, BC, where he was participating in the first round of tryouts for Team BC. So this is the most recent demonstration of how sport shapes my life every day. Yes, I am a goalie mom, and if you know, you know. Professionally, of course, I'm the CEO of Profoundry, where our vision is for a more sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future. And our work is all about enabling a clean, competitive Canada, a much less stressful job than being the mom of a goalie. And thank you for the cheers for Jonah. Throughout my career, I've worked at this intersection, finding opportunities to create value, protect the planet, and support vibrant communities. I hear some folks suggesting I'm echoing a little bit, so I am going to just see if I can adjust my volume on my end. Appreciate the feedback in the chat. And does that sound any better to folks? I see a yes. Fantastic. Good for some folks. Excellent. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned, for my whole career, I've worked at this intersection, finding opportunities to create value, protect the planet, and support vibrant communities. And that is what today is all about. As we think about the future of sport in Canada and globally, sustainability in sport is both essential and achievable. I see some comments that maybe there's still a bit of an echo. I'm going to turn my volume down one more stretch here. Over the next few hours, you're going to hear real world examples of sustainability in sport from leaders and experts in sport, in events, and in corporate sustainability. Au cours des prochaines heures, vous découvrirez des exemples concrets partagés par des experts du sport, de l'événementiel et de la durabilité en entreprise. You'll come away with the knowledge, tools, and confidence to take action, no matter the size or scope of the event you work on or where you are in your journey. So I see some folks are sharing there's an echo, others are saying there's no echo. So it sounds like maybe some folks ended up with a couple of Zoom windows open. So perhaps take a look and see if maybe there's an issue on the Zoom side of things. I apologize if you're experiencing that echo. Judy, appreciate your comment in the chat that maybe there was an extra window open. So before we begin, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that those of us joining this webinar in Canada are joining from the traditional and often unceded territories of Indigenous peoples who've called this land home long before we had the privilege to live, work, and play here. I myself am joining from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Syilx people of the Okanagan Nation, what we often refer to today as the Okanagan Valley. Je participe à ce webinaire depuis le territoire ancestral, traditionnel et non cédé de Syilx de la nation Okanagan. A few weeks ago, my son's hockey playoffs were actually hosted right here in Penticton, and we saw a huge number of young athletes arrive in the region. My son's grandmother, his Cookum, who is Cree from a Treaty 6 community called Beardy's Okamassis in Saskatchewan, traveled here to watch her grandson play. His Cookum is no stranger to the hockey rink, football stands, countless other sport venues. My husband and his siblings, his cousins, and his relations played all kinds of sports. And it has always been an important way for their family and community to come together through competition, connection, and shared experience. One of the teachings I've been gifted from my Cree family is Wakotawin, which speaks to kinship and relationships. It carries a deep meaning of interconnectedness, not only with people, but with all of creation, including animals, plants, the land, and the waters. To me, Wahkotowan speaks to the power of coming together, just like we're doing today, and to the responsibility we share to care for those relationships with one another, with the land, and with the water that sustains us. Sport has that same power, the power to bring people together. Today, our focus is on how we can extend that power to help protect the places where we live, gather, and have the privilege to play. Le sport possède ce même pouvoir, celui de rassembler les gens. Aujourd'hui, nous réfléchissons à la façon dont ce pouvoir peut contribuer à protéger les lieux où nous vivons, nous nous rassemblons et pratiquons le sport. So as we come together in learning today, I invite you to hold that teaching Wakotawin close, a teaching I'm deeply thankful to have received. I'm also incredibly thankful that we have Elder Dan Ross with us to help welcome us and guide us in starting this gathering in a good way. To show my thanks to Elder Dan, to Mother Earth and the Creator, this morning I made an offering of tobacco, which I put at the base of a tree behind my home near Okanagan Lake. So with that, it is my absolute honor to introduce Elder Dan Ross, who will open our session with a greeting, prayer, teaching, and by sharing some knowledge. And among the ways that Elder Dan has shared his knowledge and teachings in the past has been working closely with the Aboriginal Sports Circle, so he is no stranger to the world of sport. Elder Dan, over to you. Welcome.
Miigwech, thank you. And I will speak briefly, but then I am prepared to listen. I'm looking forward to the meeting. Just to let you know, I know spring is trying to come forward, but we just had about a half hour of snow and it came down pretty good. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm in the Ottawa Valley and looking forward to today. So, Kwekwe Mo Shamas and Imki Anaquat Adishnikos. My given name is Dan Ross. My spirit name is Nimki Anaquat. I am Algonquin. Pikwaknagon First Nation is my connection, my reserve, and Martin is my clan. I want to thank the Creator for this day, and I want to thank the Creator for bringing us together. And we're always looking after the future, the children of our grandchildren. We go that far. So it's very nice to be able to share all this. And we give thanks. We do not worship, but we give thanks to those that walk, those that crawl, those that swim, those that fly. They've been our teachers for centuries. And they teach us how to gather, they teach us how to raise our children. There's many things. I always like to mention the wolf because the wolf is one that really shares the children to teach them, and the grandparents often look after them while the mother and father are out gathering. So one of the things I want to share with you today is the little hummingbird. Once there was a great forest fire, and all the birds and animals rushed to escape. Hummingbird went to the river and collected a drop of water. The other birds laughed. "What are you doing?" they asked. She replied, "I'm doing what I can." So I want to share that with you, and you must always take care of something that is greater than you are. Miigwech, thank you. Let's have a good meeting. Take care.
Thank you so much, Elder Dan, for grounding us and for sharing that wonderful teaching. We're so grateful. We're going to start to dive in here. And as you know, we are here today to give you practical tools, examples, and approaches for advancing sustainability in sport and for doing what we can. Nous sommes réunis aujourd'hui pour partager avec vous des utiles pratiques, des exemples concrets et des approches qui vous permettront de faire progresser la durabilité dans le sport. And Rachel, if you can share our agenda slide. I want to start by reminding us that a key driver for today's webinar is the Canada Games Council's Sustainable Sport in Action resources, which includes a planning guide and a technical companion. And we're going to share those links for you in the chat so you can access them real time. The Council designed these resources to help sport organizations and event hosts turn sustainability from intention into action by providing guidance, practical tools, and real-world context that supports decision-making across the full event life cycle. Today, we're building on those amazing resources and we're bringing together leaders, again, from sport, from the event hosting world, and from corporate sustainability to share their expertise, best practices, and real-world experience. And to do this, we've structured the webinar into 3 labs aligned with the sport event lifecycle and with the planning guide. Our first lab, Setting Up for Success, focuses on early decisions like vision, bidding, planning, governance, and how we can embed sustainability from the outset. Our second lab, Making It Real, focuses on operational delivery and on-the-ground decisions across practical elements like transport, energy, food, materials, water, and the attendee experience. And our third lab, Showcasing Impact, will focus on measurement, reporting, community legacy, trust, and how we extend value beyond the event itself. Each of these labs is broken into 2 segments, and each segment features 2 expert speakers who will help us dig into specific and practical elements of that part of the event lifecycle. And of course, we've designed today to be valuable no matter where you're starting from on your sustainability journey, whether you're a first-time organizer planning a local single sport competition, or you're part of a team planning large multi-sport events. So as we dig in together, a few quick housekeeping notes about the best ways to participate. Your chat is open for dialogue, and thank you so much for being active in that chat already and helping us solve the echo issue. And of course, one of the benefits of virtual events is we can engage with one another throughout the webinar in ways we couldn't if we were in person. So do feel free to use the chat. And I would just request that you please share your real name as you're on your Zoom account so we know who we're engaging with. And of course, remain respectful. I'm sure we're not going to have any issues there. If you have questions for our speakers, I would ask that you submit them through the QA feature in Zoom. Questions submitted in the chat may not be monitored. We might miss them. And of course, we'll do our best to answer your questions as time allows. We're also going to be using Slido a little later, so get ready for that interactivity. For today's webinar, we're also really happy to offer to you live in French and English. So you can use Wordly to listen in your language of choice. You can scan the QR code here or click the link that we're going to drop in the chat. Select the language of choice and follow along on your device. No app required. Pour le webinaire d'aujourd'hui, la traduction et le sous-titrage en français et anglais sont disponibles à travers Wordly. Vous pouvez ainsi suivre la présentation dans la langue de votre choix. Scannez le code QR ou cliquez sur le lien dans le chat, puis sélectionnez votre langue et suivez la présentation sur votre appareil. So with that, let's get started. We're pleased to begin the webinar with opening remarks from the Honorable Adam Van Koeverden, Secretary of State for Sport for the Government of Canada and an Olympic medalist in sprint kayaking. Secretary, over to you.
Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde. Thanks so much for the invitation to join you today, and thank you to the Canada Games Council for all of your leadership in bringing this important conversation forward. Sustainability is a pillar of sport in Canada. It's a vital consideration in how we plan, deliver, and measure the success of major events. Across Canada, we've seen how sport can bring people together, build communities, and inspire the next generation. But we also know that how we host these events matters just as much as what happens on the field of play. C'est pourquoi ce moment est si important. We have an opportunity to keep raising the bar across the ecosystem in sport. That means thinking differently about how events are designed, how infrastructure is used, and how communities are engaged to leave a positive legacy long after the final whistle. In Canada, world-class hosting means more than just delivering a great event. It means doing it responsibly, sustainably, and in a way that reflects our values. The Canada Games Council has been a leader in this space, helping to move the conversation forward and setting a strong example for others to follow. 2026 is Canada's Year of Sport, and as we look ahead to major events across the country, including those beyond 2026, this work will only become more important. Nous entrons dans une nouvelle ère d'accueil, des rencontres sportifs au Canada, une ère dans laquelle de durabilité et intégrité est début un nom ajouté à la fin. Cela signifie réduire les impacts environnementaux, renforcer les communautés locales et garantir que les bienfaits du sport soient partagés plus largement et plus équitablement. Today's webinar is an opportunity to learn from each other, to share ideas, and to continue building on that momentum. And it's because of the people in this virtual room, you're the ones who deliver the next generation of sporting events in Canada. Together, you're helping define what leadership is in sustainability and how that looks in sport, not just here at home, but around the world. So thank you for all the work that you do and for your commitment to doing it even better. I hope you all have a productive and engaging webinar. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much to the Secretary of State for those remarks and continued leadership in advancing sport in Canada. So to continue setting the context for the day we have ahead, we are honored to be joined by Kellyanne Paul, President and CEO of the Canada Games Council, and of course our wonderful host for this webinar, and Philippe Marquis, freestyle skier, coach, Olympian, and chair of the COC Athlete Commission. I'll first turn it over to Kellyanne to provide some opening remarks. Welcome, Kellyanne. I'll invite you now to join me on screen.
Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Elder Dan Ross, for your words. You really set the stage with the hummingbird situation, and we really want to talk about how we can all do more. It was really wonderful to have Adam Van Koeverden open this for us, and we want to thank him and the Government of Canada for the ongoing commitment to sustainable initiatives and funding many of our organizations to move this forward one drop at a time. We're thrilled that we have everyone here on the eve of Earth Day, which is a global movement to focus on protecting our planet. Chaque secteur et chaque sport a un impact sur son environnement. Aujourd'hui, nous espérons outiller tous les gens et les organisations du pays pour réduire l'impact environnemental du sport. Our vision for today is simple. It's been spoken about a few times, but it's really to inspire and empower organizations and individuals from coast to coast with scalable tools, stories, and knowledge about how to host events sustainably in our country. We are privileged as the franchise holder of the Canada Games to be able to, it is our job to learn from one edition and strengthen the future editions and create a continuum of success, games to games to games. So we are charged with the leadership of this overall environment strategy, and everything we've done, we believe is important to share with the sector. Our resources aren't perfect. They have more work to do. However, we want to share them with all of you. We would like to thank the Government of Canada for the ongoing support to our organization to move these initiatives forward. We would like to thank the Canadian Olympic Committee, who has supported us in this particular endeavor with support from the International Olympic Committee. And Elizabeth, we'd like to thank you and your team for really helping us elevate and deliver at this level that we wouldn't have been able to do without your support. So all of you today, I know what it's like in these webinars where they're 3 hours long and you're extremely busy, you have multiple screens. We really want you to just sit back and learn as much as you can. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers here with incredible resources and incredible stories. Before I turn to Philippe, okay, so please engage with the presenters, use the Q&A feature. Don't hesitate to reach out to us after this webinar and or at any time into the future. So on behalf of the Canada Games Council Board of Directors, Canada Games Movement, and all of our host societies, thank you. Thank you for the time. Thank you for being here. And thank you for everything we can do together to make hosting in Canada better for the environment. Merci, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Kellyanne. It's been such a pleasure working with you and your team. And so thank you for setting the stage so clearly and for your leadership. I'm going to turn it over to Philippe next. When we had our prep call, Philippe joined from the mountain, which was pretty cool, but I'm glad you're joining from a little more stable internet connection this morning. Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Over to you.
Merci, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, Kellyanne and the Canada Game Council, for thinking of me. I feel very privileged and honored to be surrounded by so many leaders in the sports system, but also in this important conversation around sustainability and sports. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is a real pleasure to be here with so many leaders and change makers who believe deeply that sport can be a powerful force for good. Pour moi, c'est vraiment vers la fin de ma carrière sportive autour des Jeux olympiques de Pyeongchang en 2018 que j'ai réalisé et pris conscience de l'état critique de plusieurs glaciers et sites d'entraînement où nous pratiquions. Ça a été un moment choc et le moment où j'ai commencé à m'intéresser un petit peu plus au changement climatique. Puis je me trouve encore à 36 ans aujourd'hui à entraîner l'équipe canadienne de ski de boss. Puis je me surprends souvent à dire aux plus jeunes athlètes des choses comme dans mon temps, les choses étaient différentes. On skiait sur tel glacier jusqu'au mois de juillet, ou c'était bien mieux dans mon temps, plus de neige. Puis au rythme que le climat se transforme, je suis inquiet de ce que va être mon dialogue dans peut-être 10 ans, dans peut-être 20 ans. Donc, c'est bien de se retrouver aujourd'hui, de vouloir agir, puis de vouloir agir maintenant. For athletes and coaches or outdoor enthusiasts, the climate change is not just a theory anymore. It's a lived experience. Shorter and less predictable winters, changing snow qualities, retreating glacier, unstable terrain, growing safety risk, name it. Training plans are disrupted, competition calendars become uncertain. That direct relationship with nature is why so many mountain athletes like myself are also amongst the strongest voice calling for action. They understand that protecting the environment isn't separate from sport, but it's essential to its survival. And yet, with the great challenge lies an extraordinary opportunity because sport doesn't just respond to change, it inspires it. It sends a powerful message that performance and responsibility go hand in hand. For sport organizations, sustainability is no longer about incremental improvement or a nice to have initiative. It's about protecting the very condition that makes sport possible and maintaining credibility with fans, with athletes, with younger generation who expect leadership on climate action. It takes courage, yes, courage to question long-standing habits, courage to invest differently, courage to set ambitious goals and be transparent about the journey towards them. Sustainability is not about perfection. We know that by now. It's about progress, integrity, and leadership. And sport embodies all of that. It can lead by rethinking events models, reducing travel impact, designing climate resilient venues, and protecting our beloved ecosystems. No single organization can solve this alone. We know that by now, but together, this community and the fact that so many people show up today, you can set a powerful example. I'm starting to see it at the International Olympic Committee level, à la Fédération Internationale de Ski, at the Canadian Olympic Committee level when we're here, Andrew Baker, a bit later talking about that. I'm also extremely proud to see Freestyle Canada, where I grew up, the sport I love, deliver their first ever environmental sustainable strategy through the support of the IOC Olympic Solidarity Program and the COC. And got to mention as well a close friend of mine, Oliver Schofield, and their close collaboration with Freestyle Canada with Racing to Zero. So key themes like organizational system, terrain and events, collaborative partnership will support and advise positive decision making for years to come. Autour de nous, des gestes sont posés, des actions sont lancées. Et cette conférence est l'opportunité de tourner notre attention de principes bien compris à la mise en place de pratiques concrètes et inspirantes. Merci d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you for all of you for being here today, and thank you for helping to ensure that sport remain a source of inspiration, pride, and possibilities for a generation to come. Merci et bonne journée.
Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule and coming down off the mountain to share with us about the athlete experience. Folks, we are ready to dig in. This lab, Setting Up for Success focuses on the foundational decisions that shape everything that follows. Cette section, intitulée Mettre en place des conditions pour réussir, porte sur les décisions fondamentales qui orientent tout ce qui suit. This includes elements like establishing the vision and mission for the event, the bid process, governance, planning, and procurement. For our first segment discussion, which will focus on setting the vision and mission for an event and the bid phase of planning, we're delighted to be joined by Anne Duffy, CEO of the Anne Duffy Group, bringing broad global experience across a number of major sport events, and Andrew Baker, Chief External Affairs Officer at the Canadian Olympic Committee, bringing insights from the Canadian sports system and from hosting bids. It's my pleasure to invite Anne to join us on screen. Anne, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Bienvenue tout le monde. Hello, and I'm delighted to join today's national webinar. I'm hailing in from Whistler, British Columbia, co-host of the 2010 Winter Olympic and Paralympic Games, where I had an opportunity to transition my career from sustainability with cities and businesses to sport. And since then, this has been a passionate form of work and collaboration in my career. I wanted to start by saying when we talk about sustainable events, sustainable sport events, what does that mean? And it's using the power of the people and the processes and the planning to deliver an excellent sport event, but to also address as best we can environmental, social, and economic impacts, both positive and negative, and opportunities, so we can reduce as many negatives, increase as many positives, and leave a host region and the sector better than we found it. I found personally when I worked with Vancouver 2010, and since then with many Olympic and World Cup bids and organizing committees in host cities since then, that generally sport event planners are yes people. Sometimes we haven't done, many times we haven't done this work before, but we say yes and we figure it out along the way. So I'm happy to share my experience and kind of what we see in terms of trends and best practices around how do we unleash the best decisions, the best opportunities to treat the environment lightly and to engage and collaborate with many to have a successful event with great legacies. So I break it down into 4 simple planning steps. One is to engage, to understand the issues of the sport event community that you were involved with in hosting your event. 2 is to prioritize what are the opportunities and decisions we actually have control over so that we can make that happen. And then through collaboration, where might we influence and help improve outcomes through the work and collaboration of others. 3 is how to understand how we can work and play together, how we can communicate, share our resources. That's human resources, that's money and finances, that's technical resources, so that we can showcase and demonstrate and innovate and celebrate our best thinking along the way. And then finally, which is also an ode to the Canada Games Council Sustainable Event Toolkit, is what has been the evolution and what are the on-hand sustainable event guidance tools such that we can shape our decision-making along the way to make the best use of our opportunities in a limited timeline. So if we move to the next slide. When we talk about engage, the bid phase really sets the stage for what's possible for a sport event vision and goals. And yes, it's now becoming a more historic example, but I'm going to pull some examples from Vancouver 2010, and I'll drop some other examples from other Canadian and international events I've been involved with. But if we go way back to 2000, when the Vancouver 2010 bid was just getting started, the issues of the day were things like rampant industrial forest clear cutting. There was challenges around marine fish stocks because our winters weren't cold enough and long enough. Something that Philippe was referring to, we had pine beetle infestations in our forest stocks. We've got changing patterns in snow and weather. In our host cities of Vancouver and in Whistler, we had challenges around affordable housing. At the time, if British Columbia was going to put its hand up to host the games, we wanted to show how could we have a dignified, respectful, and inclusive approach around First Nations engagement, something that we would now call reconciliation in action. But in those days, it was how do we start and begin to think about respecting protocols and partnerships with Indigenous First Nations whose territories the games were going to occur on, and then expand that nationally. How do we use the purchasing power and the sourcing power of all the stakeholders to really drive social economic development? That's jobs, that's skill development, that's new business development, that's trade. And then how do we increase sport opportunities as in many ways we can through the life cycle of hosting the games? And then ultimately all pull together, how do we show the world a better way in that time to do this work? Before I move to the next slide, I just want to say an example would be, yes, that's Tessa and Scott on the podium from the 2010 figure skating, but they're standing on a podium built with pine beetle affected wood. They're holding a flower bouquet that's representative of Indigenous thinking and some local plants, albeit it was February, and they're wearing a recycled medal as a metal thing. So I just want to use that as a flash example of how the thinking helped to drive this early vision. Next slide. For any of you that have had the pleasure of coming out west, I hope you have, and many more. I certainly would love to suggest have a drop in at the Richmond Olympic Oval. It was our speed skating venue that initially in the bid was planned to be at the Simon Fraser University Burnaby campus, but through some updated planning, we realized it would be a more useful legacy if it was just adjacent to the Vancouver International Airport in the city of Richmond, where we developed a multi-use venue and designed it for the long term. So we needed a 2,000-meter long track speed skating venue that would have refrigeration for ice rinks, but we also wanted to have a flexibility for the venue to have multi-sport opportunities for indoor basketball, volleyball, indoor rugby, as well as a high-performance training center for the national rowing team, as well as a community center for the city of Richmond. Just a beautiful picture of the roof in this building. That's 1.1 million board feet of pine beetle affected wood. Again, we could take wood that's been distressed but still has perfect integrity for support. We had rainwater capture from our roof to help with hydrating, irrigating landscaping. We had eco-efficient washrooms and toilets. We had First Nations art features commissioned by First Nation artists, both on the exterior design elements and a permanent art installation in the venue. I'll also finish by saying this was a green leadership in environmental and energy design, green building. Next. So in the prioritization game, it's looking at what's possible within that sphere of control and decision-making. I had the pleasure of working with the Los Angeles Summer Games bid for the 2028 Olympics, and Los Angeles, like many towns and cities in Canada, has hosted small and large sport events. It's very much a part of their local social and economy of the Los Angeles County area. But the real focus was, okay, we've got all the venues. We're lucky on that front. Where else can we move the needle for positive impact? And given the cultural diversity and socioeconomic diversity of Los Angeles, the prioritization after 1,000 conversations and more with residents, business, community leaders, not-for-profits, broadcasters, athletes, innovation universities, incubation hubs, was how can we really advance social inclusion? How can we really leverage the technology and innovation that's just really active around renewable energy and collaborating with utilities in ways we hadn't before to really up solar power, not only in venue clusters, but also in residential areas? And how do we really lean into radical reuse of materials so that when we can source things that we need to host the games, how do we keep it in the economy where it can be used post-games? And you're going to see this term around circularity has definitely picked up with other small, medium, and large sport events. Shout out to friends in Toronto when we hosted the Para-Pan Am Games in 2015. Again, most of the venues were built. There was a few new ones that were built with municipal partnerships, but there was a real push on diversity, equity, and inclusion. and how we could have all stakeholders work with a unified approach to sourcing decision making. Happy to say that a legacy of the 2015 games was the Greater Toronto Area adopted lock, stock, and barrel the sustainable sourcing diversity sourcing program, because it had been tried and trued and tested and improved and later adopted by the city. Next slide. Okay, so now we're on number 3 around partnering, and that's really when we start early, and that's going to be my favorite repeated message. When we start early with the key stakeholders and partners that can help plan and deliver the games, and whether that's recent games in St. John's, Canada, summer games, or games in Newfoundland, or in upcoming in Quebec City and other places, it's through those partnerships and early planning and decision making we can understand what are the things that we need and how do we do it in a way that's going to have a lower carbon footprint, that is going to keep materials in use for a longer period of time, and where good tracking and reporting can help us look at the math at what our carbon footprint is and how we can reduce it. And for any, I'm giving an example of Paris 2024, but certainly within the slate of Canada Summer and Winter Games, or certainly FIFA Summer Women and Men's World Cup Games, by really leaning into how we do procurement and sourcing and collaborating together, we can find solutions that can end up making the footprint, in this case around carbon, much, much less. Next slide. I want to just, as a gracious nod to Dan, our elder, and to a very strong theme that was really born in Vancouver 2010's way of hosting the games, was in that early visioning stage. We knew we would not get permission and the social license to move forward on the bid if we didn't have strong relationships and respect and ways of planning and decision making with the 4 host First Nations. So that was the Lillooet, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam First Nations, and then later expanded across the country. But we had legacy agreements in the beginning such that we had conversations with First Nation chiefs to understand what was important to them. And employment was very important, and respect for the land was very important. And so this picture features Whistler Olympic Park, home of our cross-country ski jump and biathlon venues, with recreational public amenities as well. We've got, yes, a LEED green building lodge, but the trails were designed in a more compact way, and that first contract was let to a partnership with an established construction firm, along with a First Nations owned firm, that helped with the trail clearing and site planning, that led to follow-on work with other employers in the Sea to Sky corridor, which led to reducing seasonal unemployment within 18 months with the Mount Currie First Nation. We handled all the waste wood on site, so we didn't have a large footprint on that. I want to close. I see my time is coming up. I just want to close on the last very important one, and we're going to talk about, 2 more quick points. One was the rise, we really saw in 2010, the rise of athlete ambassadors for the environment. Without winter, there's no winter games. We had a carbon offset sponsor, Offsets. We had a bob wheeling demonstration in Vancouver that, if you remember, we had very mild weather. So they were wheeling down Granville Street, really helping to demonstrate and activate campaign and messaging around the importance of climate-led decision-making. Now I think I can finish on my slide around good governance. So we now have an international standard for sustainable event planning and management. Some of the early work was done with Vancouver 2010 and how we developed a toolkit with other partners. The City of Richmond adopted one, and then in collaboration, Jill Orris, who's going to be speaking in a minute, and Kellyanne and I and others helped to develop a Canada Games sustainable event toolkit to really help guide planning and decision making so that we can make the best decisions around low carbon games, respecting natural sites, and really addressing some of those socioeconomic impact opportunities. So that's a whirlwind tour. Thanks very much, and I'll be happy to answer questions after Andrew.
Thank you so much, Anne, for helping us kick things off so effectively and for sharing those tools. And of course, we've got the Sustainable Sport Toolkit that this webinar is grounded in as well, which we would encourage you all to check out. So with that, I'm delighted to welcome Andrew to the screen next to share some perspectives, and then we will have a quick chat between Anne and Andrew and myself. So Andrew, I invite you to join me on screen.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Anne, for kicking us off. It's great to follow Anne because I think so much of the work that I'm going to talk about in relation to the BC 2030 bid is built on the foundation of the amazing efforts of the of the Vancouver 2010 Organizing Committee and their partnership with the Four Host First Nations, which really set the foundation for the leadership of the Four Host First Nations related to the BC 2030 bid. So, Andrew Baker, je suis le chef de relations externes avec le Comité olympique canadien. I'm coming to you today from Montreal or Chochoge on the traditional territories of the Kanagahaga First Nation. And I'm going to be speaking about my and the COC's experience in the BC 2030 Olympic and Paralympic bid process. It was the world's first ever Indigenous-led bid. And I come to the discussion as a non-Indigenous partner in that bid, a non-Indigenous organization that was invited in to the process through a collaboration agreement with the four host First Nations, as Anne mentioned, the Littlewat, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations that really invited partners in to consider what a BC 2030 Olympic bid could look like for the country, for the region, and for the nations. And I come to this discussion with a lot of humility and a lot of appreciation for the leadership and the leaders within those nations who not only invited us in, but provided the framework for which we all operated and that you'll hear about a little bit later. It was truly, really their vision and their energy and their foresight that led us down this road. And it had a lasting impact on me, on the COC, and I think everyone who was part of the process. And so it just come with a lot of appreciation for their energy and for their willingness to invite us into that process. As I jump to the slides, I guess the starting point for the BC 2030 process in terms of sustainability was really the IOC's Agenda 2020 plus 5, which set the framework we were required to adhere to as an organizing committee in 2030 as a games delivery mechanism. Previously, the games had been required to be carbon neutral, and as of 2030, they were required to be climate positive. Now, that language has shifted a little bit in the IOC's lexicon, but at the time, was the framework that we were working within was climate positivity. So I think, Anne, you mentioned it, leave the place better than how we found it. This was actually a requirement. And so that really set the framework for what we were working towards as a bid committee and then as an organizing committee in the future. And what I thought was important to highlight here was that was the franchise holder, that was the international framework, and that was the IOC that was setting those goals, those targets at the time through their partnership, their leadership with the UN and other global partners. So they had made the commitment, and that commitment trickled down to the organizing committees and then the bid committees that were putting bids forward for 2030. If we jump to the next slide, at the outset of the BC 2030 project, it was an invitation from the four host First Nations to the Canadian Olympic Committee, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, the City of Vancouver, and the Resort Municipality of Whistler to join together and to support the exploration of an Olympic and Paralympic Games bid for 2030. And through that process, the COC came and brought our games knowledge, our technical knowledge, and our international bid experience. But really, the leadership and the vision for this project came from the host First Nations. And so as we set on the path of determining what a games concept would look like. So before building out the technical and the venue plans, we started on the journey of what do we want these games to be? What is the concept? What is the leading vision and idea behind these games? And those conversations started in community. And that was very important for the leadership of the four host First Nations, is that the ideation of what this could be started with conversations in communities. And so with the team and with the leadership of both the chiefs of those four host First Nations and the technical staff that were in the day-to-day of the operationalization of the bid, we launched into a community engagement program. And this is a visual representation of a community engagement with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. And it really, as you'll see in the bottom left corner, environment was not an afterthought. It was really foundational to the concept. And I think what I came to learn is that as leaders, and when your leadership have been carrying and stewarding the lands for generations, it's part of a way of being. It's not an afterthought. It's not an add-on to the planning. It is foundational to the planning. It is how we started our meetings in a good way. It was reference to the different seasons that we were in almost every meeting that we were in. And so it became really foundational to the way that we were talking about this project. And I would say there was really two different aspects that really jumped out at me as it related to what we saw for an environmental and a sustainability vision in the project. And one was the delivery of the event itself. And then the other was the platform that it offered to highlight Indigenous leadership, Indigenous stewardship of the lands, and Indigenous ways of learning, being, and treating the earth. And so you'll see a couple, and this was fairly consistent between the different engagements that we did in the four host First Nations. But the idea of the event itself will focus on being a sustainable event. It will be foundational to how we deliver locally. It will leave a positive impact on the local communities, and it will highlight Indigenous leadership globally. And not only in sustainability, but I would say across the different elements of impact and legacy, it was an opportunity both to deliver value to community and to local peoples, but also to highlight Indigenous leadership around the world. And that was a really important starting point for both aspects. And so this was done at the outset of the project. It was done in terms of setting the concept. This was before we even got into venue plans, into technical plans. And so what this allowed us to do was then take this information, take this vision, take these priorities, and use them to shape the budgets, the technical plans, the operational plans that came as part of the bid with the IOC. And so, and one of the items that I noted very clearly in this, and that really resonated with me, was that's often not the case, is what I was told and educated on, was that often community engagement with First Nations will come later in a process when a vision has been set, a concept has been developed. And so it's almost like a validation of existing ideas, whereas this was the starting point and the foundation for those ideas, which was really important. And I think really set the stage for how this project would roll out. Now, ultimately, this led to the development of a concept. That concept then led to approvals by the various municipalities and the host First Nations to put forward a hosting proposal. The hosting proposal was much more operational in detail, provided the budgets, etc. It was all shaped by this. Unfortunately, the bid did not proceed past the bid phase. We were all very disappointed to see that it failed to get the necessary support from the provincial government. But on the next slide, what I wanted to highlight is that just because we didn't actually get to the point of being able to deliver on these commitments, it didn't mean that it didn't have an impact. And I would say that if I look at the COC as an organization, it impacted the way that we thought about our climate action. It impacted our ability to have conversations in the broader sport community at the national level. But it also did lead us to a climate action plan, which includes Indigenous leadership, includes reference to work with First Nations to help guide our climate action and the work that we can do. And so the message here is that despite the fact that the bid did not proceed, we still were able to maximize the learnings, and it still left a legacy both on us as organizations and as individuals. And I think, and we hope, on the communities that were sharing their work with us. So as we think about these things, and this, but whether it's in sustainability or climate, in other areas as well, just because we don't actually get the events does not mean that there cannot be legacies that come out of it. And I think we've seen that across a number of different areas. I'm going to leave the presentation there. I know we have some questions, and I'm sure there's questions from the audience. So that's it for my presentation today, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Fantastic. Andrew, thank you so much. And thank you for your remarks. In the interest of time, because we've got an amazing agenda ahead and you have set the stage so well, I'm just going to ask each of you sort of one question building on your presentations. And of course, this segment is all about how do we turn vision into reality. And so, Andrew, I'd love to start with you, just with your wonderful closing. I can't imagine the disappointment, and yet so much good work and so much learning in putting that bid together. So as we think about how we need to set the stage for success, what would you want, bidding organizations, bidding teams, what would you suggest they keep top of mind in the earliest stages when they're putting a bid together, when they're in those early early planning stages so that we see that those efforts around sustainability, engagement, reconciliation showing up on the ground?
Yeah, I'll maybe mention two things from my perspective. And one is, I think, just how sustainability, how environmental considerations find their way into the DNA of a bid and into the DNA of an event, and making sure that it's not thought of as an afterthought, but it really is truly authentic to the project itself. And it feels like part of the original vision. And then that vision finds its way into the operational planning, into the budgets, et cetera. The other piece that I would say as it relates to a legacy that I really saw and something that we heard a lot of is oftentimes when we talk about sporting events, whether it's in the bid phase or in the delivery phase, is they actually offer a really interesting platform for partners to come together to have conversations that don't really exist outside of that platform. And we heard that a lot, is that people felt like it was really value added to come together to talk about a positive thing and to talk about a vision for the future, because so much of the interaction between maybe different levels of government, between different nations and governments, between different enterprises is about solving issues. And so sporting events, I think we shouldn't lose track of the fact that all of us as we deliver sport events have a positive platform to talk about change and bring partners together and parties together to talk about things positively. And I think that should be considered at all stages. Is we actually have a really, it's almost like a superpower for sporting events to bring people together to have positive conversations.
That's a really powerful message. Thank you, Andrew. And Anne, again, building on your remarks and thinking about what it looks like to actually leave the land in a better space than when we found it. When you think about the early planning stages, what would be that piece of advice, or maybe what do organizers sometimes miss? Like when we think about those opportunities to engage early, what's a pitfall that you would advise, in those early stages to organizers of events of all shapes and sizes?
I'd say two things, Elizabeth. One would be that start the conversations early. There's sort of a flywheel analogy that I use where people go, what's a sport event and why are we talking about infrastructure and venues and procurement and merchandise and food and beverage and transport? Like, what is this sort of alphabet soup of all the things we have to figure out? So there's an awareness and knowledge and understanding of what's involved in mounting a sustainable sport event that is successful. So there's this education piece that needs to happen, that the alchemy of that is best served with engagement and workshops and discussions and meetings so that people understand, oh, this is a thing that has many facets, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so if I'm a regulator or a government civil servant, or if I'm an athlete organization, or if I'm a business, I can see where my action might be able, or my responsibilities might be able to fit in. So if you don't start early, that learning and education and sort of shared literacy of what a sustainable event is can be limited because people don't see where they can fit in. And then second, especially when you talk about having a license to operate, is for people to understand what's in it for me in the long term. How might I benefit in the planning and delivery of the event? But what are we going to leave afterwards that's going to raise the quality of life, raise the business opportunities in that? So I would say it would be a combination of start early, and there is this repeated communications and education and engagement so that everybody's on the same sort of thinking around what is possible. And I want to close with, for any of us that have done a lot of this work, when we have a sustainable event management system, people like me, Jill, and others, we know where to insert those wishes and dreams and actions in, say, a 7-year, 4-year, 2-year, 1-year planning cycle, right? So we know how to collate those best wishes and hopes and dreams into actionable steps that we can make throughout a event like life cycle.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. And Andrew, you got agreement in the chat in terms of that opportunity for that bid process to be a catalyst for positive outcomes, no matter what the outcome is. So thank you both so much for joining us this morning and helping us set the context. And of course, you're welcome to stick with us for the rest of the event. So for the next segment of our webinar, which focuses on early planning elements of the event life cycle, we're going to be joined by speakers Jill Orris, Manager of Sustainability for FIFA World Cup 2026, which I'm pretty excited about, and my friend Tanya Lagresta, Global Head of Sustainability at Colliers. Jillian brings real-time experience planning event that, again, I think lots of us are feeling pretty excited about. And Tanya brings a broader perspective on how to successfully think about sustainability in making practical business decisions related to planning, procurement, and things that we can all benefit from. Jill, over to you. I'll invite you to join me on screen first.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. I've kept my slides fairly high level, but really excited to talk about all of the great things that we are trying to do at the FIFA 26 Men's World Cup. I got a notification this morning, we're 52 days out. So everything's great, but this is definitely crunch time. And it's kind of exciting to look back in this opportunity to sort of see how far we've come over the last several years of the planning and implementation, and really looking at that early piece of this conversation. So like Elizabeth said, my name is Jillian Orris. I am joining from Vancouver, which is one of the 16 host cities for the FIFA 26 Men's World Cup. I am joining from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And as I said, today I'm keeping my slides very high level. I'm also open to answering questions, but I really want to talk about setting the tone early, definitely mirroring some of the conversations that we've just heard, decisions that shape everything. I'm really looking forward to talking about some of the lessons that we've learned from the World Cup, and then building the conditions for success moving forward. So as we heard earlier today, really important to have these earlier decisions integrated in relation to sustainability. So early decisions really lock in, 70 to 80% of sustainability outcomes. So without that forward thinking, even from the bid phase, as Anne mentioned, really challenging to ingrain sustainability at a later stage. So one piece that I'm really excited about is when I joined the FIFA team, is we do have a public facing sustainability strategy, which is our anchor for all things that we do in relation to environmental sustainability. I'm focusing primarily on environmental sustainability, but our strategy does have social, governance, environmental, and I'm just gonna get our tech support to actually put a link directly to our strategy in the chat if anybody is interested. This is a public facing document. It has been a public facing document for several years. And this is really allowing us to, hold ourselves accountable, but also everybody else accountable. So what we are encouraging everybody else to hold us accountable so that we publicly know what we are working towards and the goals that we are trying to achieve. This strategy is actually aligned with global frameworks. I know a few of those have been mentioned, but I also just wanted to put in the chat a couple of them. So the United Nations Sport for Climate Action Framework, FIFA is a signatory of this framework, and it's definitely one that I think many of us working in this space really look to as a really great best practice. I know several people on this call have also been involved in reimagining that and developing it over the last several years. Another framework that we lean heavily on, we are not yet a signatory, but the Sport for Nature framework. This is a newer framework that was released a few years ago, but it's really connecting the dots in relation to sustainability and sports and how that conversation relates into nature. Nature is one of the easiest, most tangible and accessible things that people can relate to. It doesn't matter your walk of life, where you come from, what language you speak, we all have some type of connection to nature. So really being able to ingrain your messaging, your practices, your strategy with the nature element is really supportive in being able to communicate that piece out. As I just said, tangible, accessible, digestible. I feel like I say this term 9 times out of 10. I think I say it almost every day. Really developing clear expectations across all stakeholder groups. So what is tangible? What is accessible? What is digestible? What can we actually achieve that aligns with the goals of every entity that is working towards this? As you can imagine, this is a very large project. It is the largest sporting event in the world. And so there are several different entities across the board that work towards environmental sustainability practices. So we work really closely with both of our host cities, specifically in Canada, that's Toronto and Vancouver. We work with our federal governments and Sport Canada to make sure that we're aligned there. And then we also work with our counterparts in the US and Mexico to make sure that we can speak that same language across the board. So being able to integrate those tangible, accessible, digestible goals that that everybody is very well aware of and in alignment with from an early stage is really helping to set us up for success in that longer term conversation. It helps avoid any interpretation gaps or misunderstanding of what the expectation is. And this allows for sustainability to not be an add-on, but it's really making sure that is integrated from day one. And I have to say, with the development of this strategy from my coworkers over in Zurich, that's been able to be front of mind for several of our different functional areas across the tournament landscape. So not only are we driving it, but we also have champions in different functional areas who are also driving the sustainability conversation because expectations were set out really early in the process. That sort of translates into how we work with our different functional areas and we engage decision makers early. So making sure that sustainability is front of mind, we're in the room, we're at the table before budgets are developed, schedules are finalized, and details are really locked in is incredibly key. This allows for teams like procurement, which is a huge avenue in sustainability. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second here, and our delivery teams to really prioritize sustainability outcomes. And again, I don't think I've ever met anybody who has said, oh, we don't really care about this. This doesn't really matter. Everybody is interested in this and wants to be part of the solution. Sometimes it's just a matter of understanding how. So if you can engage those decision makers early, it really sets you up for success in the long term. And then I just want to circle back to this public commitment. I think sometimes it is scary to, publicly state what you are trying to achieve, but it really allows you to hold yourself accountable. And when pressure is mounting and there are, 52 days to go, having a public facing strategy that we are working towards really makes sure that sustainability isn't deprioritized and that we are still part of the decision making process, even through execution phase. It really creates that shared understanding that sustainability is really non-negotiable, and we're trying to ingrain it across the board as much as possible. Okay, I'm going to move on to decisions that shape everything. And I feel like I really liked looking at this section because I felt like looking back at my time with FIFA, it's really interesting to see the decisions that were shaped a year and a half ago that really helped dictate where we are today. So like I said earlier, the earliest choices have the biggest downstream impact. So many different elements around sustainability were considered, but there are a couple big ones that I just wanted to highlight sort of to see where we are today. So venue selection was a massive one. We have 16 different host cities across 3 different nations. Obviously, the venues are going to be like kind of the main hub of where everything is happening. So we actually were able to embed sustainability criteria into the selection process of venues. And we have a public facing requirement. This is not a nice to have, it is a requirement for all 16 venues across the tournament footprint to be LEED certified prior to the tournament time. So exciting to announce that both Toronto Stadium in Toronto and BC Place will be certified prior to tournament time. And that is a huge achievement. This has not been done as of yet. Some of the stadiums did have LEED certification before, but they needed to be upgraded or validated. And this is a really good news story. Took a lot of effort, and huge kudos to the sustainability teams at the stadiums for getting that over the line. This is a requirement, like I said, but there are some other requirements as well. So looking at things like how venues are using energy, waste, how they're supporting mobility goals, and if there are gaps in some of those conversations, how we as FIFA can come in and help support advancing those conversations through the venue infrastructure. Another piece that I'm so proud of and really excited to share today is our procurement strategy. So like I mentioned before, locking sustainability requirements into early conversations is really key. And this comes right from the get-go, the very first item that you are looking to procure. If you're able to make sure that you have a sustainable procurement strategy that helps support that process, that's integrated across the entire tournament. So I wanted to just share in the chat, we do have a public-facing sustainable sourcing code. I encourage everybody to take a look at this. I think it's going to be shared right here, but this is really allowing for our entire team across the 3 different countries, I should say 4, Zurich as well, to make sure that any item that is procured that goes through a sustainable sourcing code, which is very strict requirements around environmental and social sustainability. And every single one of our suppliers agrees to adhere to this code. This is a really good step in the right direction, and it's really allowed us to evaluate our suppliers and evaluate what we are procuring in a very robust, sustainable way. This helps prioritize materials, services, and logistics, which with lower environmental and social negative impacts. Really excited to share that today. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out. And then, like I said, this early engagement for all parties. I was brought into the conversation about a year and a half ago, but my colleagues in Zurich have been working on this project for several years from bid phase. Our team out of the US has been ingrained since the get-go. And really what this helps do is it helps move the conversation forward and avoids any premium costs later on if sustainability is considered to be like an add-on. So this allows sustainability to be part of the design, to be part of the understanding of the collective group. And you'd really be surprised, like I said, of how many people want to be part of the solution. I have people reaching out almost every single day being like, hey, this cutlery we're procuring, how do we make it a little bit more sustainable? And those conversations are great. And never did I think that I was going to be procuring sustainable cutlery for Toronto Stadium. But here I am because the catering team reaches out to ask that question. And it's great to see how many people really want to be part of the solution in the roles that they are specifically playing. Okay, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to kind of run through this next piece. If you can move to the next slide. I want to talk about some lessons that we've learned from the FIFA World Cup. So I'll give some high-level practical examples. I can't go into the weeds of every single thing today, but I really want to show how early choices have reduced impact and avoided long-term headaches when it comes to environmental sustainability. So like I said, we have a public-facing environmental sustainability strategy. I'm specifically focusing on the environmental pillar for this piece of the conversation. We have 8 objectives across infrastructure, climate, air quality, waste and circular economy, water, biodiversity, there's that nature piece, and awareness activities. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the awareness activity piece. As you can see, this is a fairly robust strategy. It focuses on 8 different areas, and across the board in all host cities, in all stadiums, we are looking at each of these elements, and you can see in the public-facing strategy what we're working towards specifically there. There's also a great opportunity for us to tell this collective story. So there is an alignment across all 16 host cities, all 3/4 nations, FIFA 26, and specifically FIFA Canada 26 from the Canadian landscape, and then federal national governments. We work really closely with our federal national government partners to allow us to speak the same language and tell that same story. I think, Kellyanne, this is probably very relevant to you right now at the Canada Games as well. We often talk about this sort of funnel model where you're looking at everything from host cities to then the national engagement to the federal to the global. And if you're able to make sure that conversation and that language is woven throughout all of the different levels, the storytelling piece, the communication piece, the reporting piece, the legacy piece becomes a lot more digestible, tangible, accessible for everyday consumer, and then everyone across the board, including sponsors, partners, federal governments. If you're able to just tell that collective story in one funnel, it's really supportive of advancing sustainability. Another piece I mentioned is the LEED certification requirements for all stadiums. I won't get into too much detail with that one, but this is a huge step in the right direction, and our team is incredibly proud of all the work that has happened. And then I talked about a little bit about the sustainable sourcing code, so feel free to take a look at that if anybody has any questions with that. A couple other pieces we have, and this was integrated really early on, is we are doing a food rescue program across all 16 stadiums. I will say both Toronto Stadium and BC Place have pre-existing food rescue programs, which is a great example of how Canada is really leading sustainability. But we are increasing the reach of said programs, and we're going to be having them across all 16 stadiums. So as you can imagine, that's not an easy add-on. That's something that needs to be integrated from the get-go. And so a lot of work has been done on the food rescue programs. We are also working very closely with Trees for Life, which is a national tree planting organization, and the Arbor Day Foundation, in collaboration with them to plant trees across all 16 host cities, which is a phenomenal effort. If anyone's interested, we're doing it tomorrow. So if anyone would like to participate, please reach out. We'd love to have you. We are doing things like measuring our GHG emissions across the entire event footprint. This is not something that can be added on at the end. These conversations started years ago, deep dive evaluations from our team in Zurich and really understanding what we can measure across the board. We have a sustainable dissolution plan, so making sure that post-tournament time, where are all the items that we have sustainably procured going after? And so you can imagine there's a team working on that, because that is also not an easy feat that can just be added on at the end. And then I think the one thing I just wanted to add or leave with this section is we really want to prevent, we can't change it now, so just do how it is. So that's how we really want to integrate that early conversation to make sure that you are not hitting those points later on in tournament time. I think we've all been, most likely, in sporting events where things sort of, fall by the wayside, and then decisions are made at a later date that might not necessarily align with the goals and the hopes of what you had tried to achieve. So making sure that those conversations, those programs, those tactics are really starting early in the phase, or early in the life cycle, so that you don't hit a point where it's like, well, it's too late in the game. Of course, there will be things that fall in the cracks. This is just the nature of the work that we are doing, but advancing those conversations as early as possible and finding those champions sooner rather than later. And then finally, next slide, let's talk a little bit about building the conditions for success. So as we've said, as we've heard from everybody who's spoken today so far, sustainability succeeds when it's embedded, empowered, and operationalized. So making sure that sustainability is very much part of that governance model. So we have sustainability integrated in all levels of our organizational structure. Really proud to say that our team works incredibly collaboratively, best practices across the board. I just got a great tip from our team in Mexico that we're then now implementing in Canada. And it's the ways that we can collaborate together, from our team in Zurich to our team in the US to Mexico and Canada, really allows us to make sure that we are pushing this conversation forward. Empowering procurement, we've talked a lot about that. Please feel free to look at the Sustainable Sourcing Code. Again, that is a huge avenue where we can really change the game in relation to environmental sustainability. As you can imagine, there are several different things that you procure throughout the event. So if you can make them sustainable, the more you can do that, the better. Build shared accountability, so public-facing strategies, making sure that clear roles, responsibilities across venues, cities, suppliers, and international teams, making sure that you are reporting and you're tracking your progress in a tangible and accessible way. And then I just want to end, I know I'm almost out of time, so thanks for that note. I just want to end up on a few pieces around advice for future organizers, because I know that can sometimes feel really daunting. It can sometimes feel like it's very overwhelming. I always like to say this: I would not be sitting in this role with the experience and understanding that I have if it wasn't for Kellyanne and the Canada Games Council, and in her support when I was with the Canada Games Council. Prior to that, my work with different entities, I wouldn't be here with the support of others. So I am standing with everybody who has supported me over several years to get to where I am now and getting to be able to do this work. We are not alone in this conversation. There is, I think, 150 participants on this call right now, meaning there are 150 of us at least that want to see this work move forward. And that is phenomenal. That was not the case 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so it's so amazing to see that. So please reach out, lean on this community, help support each other, take best practices, build on the best practices, and don't underestimate the power of this community, because it is huge and we can really make the change. I want to echo what both Anne and Andrew have stated, that communicating this work is so important. So the more we can talk about it, the more we can educate each other, the better. And I always like to leave these sessions with what has become my catchphrase over the last few years. There's no fill in the blank sport, in my case, football, on a dead planet. So all the other priorities around all these major sporting events, they will not matter if we cannot have our events. So this is a priority, and I'm so proud to see all of the people here today. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for listening, and please reach out if you do have any questions.
Thank you so much, Jillian. Your expertise and also your passion for this space comes through really clearly. So we really appreciate you talking about some of the real life planning that you're going through. It's my pleasure now. Jillian, don't go away, because we're going to bring you back in a little bit, but you can turn your camera off and take a little break now. It's my pleasure to invite my friend and colleague Tanya to join us on screen. And as any good facilitator, when we're tight on time, you lean on your friends, and Tanya has graciously agreed to keep her remarks a little bit tighter so we can get to a couple of questions. And with that, Tanya, over to you. Thank you so much.
Well, it's a pleasure and honor and privilege to be here. What an esteemed gathering of folks, but Elizabeth, wouldn't have expected anything less of you. So I think what I'm going to do is just shift a little bit of the conversation. We've been touching upon it from the planner perspective and move it from kind of the sustainable events to more of a sustainable venues. But before I dig into that and talk about sustainability in sport through the venue perspective, I just want to share why this matters to me personally. I work in commercial real estate. We think every day about places that last, buildings, venues that shape how people come together, move, experience community over decades, not just a sports season or sporting event. I also live in a beautiful part of Ontario in Caledon, north of the city. And I see very clearly how decisions made for major sporting moments continue to shape everyday life long after the crowds leave. My family has the privilege of the Trans-Canada Trailway runs through our neighborhood, and we walk that trail to an equestrian venue that was constructed as a result of the municipal partnership that Anne spoke about earlier for the Pan Am Games. And that venue didn't disappear when the games ended. It's still where our community gathers. It still hosts events, and it's part of our shared space. And I think that's where, sustainability stops being this abstract concept, because the communities live with the outcomes. And that's why approaching it through the sustainability mindset and tangible impact outcomes really matters. And support creates places that outlast the event cycle, so that they have this inherent long-term responsibility and legacy. And some of that's been touched on already. The venues aren't temporary. They quietly influence, as I mentioned earlier, how communities continue connect, how energy and resources are not only used in the construction, but how they're used year after year when the fans and the athletes get to experience as normal. And so for me, that's why I see sustainability in sport has to really extend beyond the event execution and into how venues are designed, operated, upgraded, and invested in over time. And so in commercial real estate, there's a basic truth. Asset value is shaped by market demand. And in sport, event planners and the fans and the athletes, but definitely the event planners, are the market. They are the customer. And for those of you who are in the business, you are the customer. And increasingly, we're seeing asks of the customer when it comes to selecting venues. Things that have been touched upon. How energy efficient is the venue? What data exists on emissions, resource use? How are suppliers selected? Is sustainability embedded, or will it be an add-on for this one event? And that demand and those questions that are being asked, and who is selected to be the host over time, it influences which venues win bids, where capital gets allocated, and how venues are managed and upgraded over time. And so this is the shift we're in right now, where sustainability is being increasingly recognized not as a short-term enhancement, but more as a core value driver for the venues themselves. And so when we kind of look at venues, let's just say, as systems that shape emissions, from a data perspective, venues really do lock in the biggest driver of emissions, right? Energy use, mobility, how easy they're able to be accessed, waste, water systems, food and supplier operations. And if sustainability is treated really as a one event overlay, the impact is really limited. If it, let's just think about an inclusive space for people with physical and cognitive limitations. There is a difference when you go to an event where you can see that there are makeshift accommodations versus one that has an inherent inclusive design built into it. And so if it's embedded in the asset itself, sustainability becomes repeatable, scalable, and far more powerful. And this is where I see the power of venues moving from being hosts to enablers of a mutual success and desired outcome. As I reflect on what Elder Dan said at the onset, I studied environmental sciences and in university, and a big component of our work was understanding sustainability through the Indigenous communities. And what's always stuck with me, there's many things, but this concept of intergenerational knowledge. And so for me, that's one of the most important lessons I've learned, is that intergenerational responsibility, and how it is that through the venues and how we build them and we manage them and deconstruct them, having that mindset of making decisions today with tomorrow's community in mind. Now, I'm not always talking directly to my clients using that language, but that's the point I'm trying to make, and increasingly, I am not a goalie mom. I'm a dance mom during one season and a ski mom during the other season. And as a ski mom with a young daughter who's an aspiring ski racer, we live in this beautiful part of the country. We ski on hills, not mountains. But at our latitude, climate change is really showing up quite quickly. Every year is bringing shorter seasons, greater variability in conditions. That's also resulting in these sport venue locations requiring greater energy expenditure just to keep the runs skiable. And so we as a family, whether we're attending an event or as kind of the budding athletes that we are, you can see the strain climate places on the sports infrastructure, and that's not theoretical. That said, I'm really encouraged because when I look at the young athletes and when I look at the younger fans, they're already understanding sustainability differently. And there is this implicit expectation that it's embedded and it is done with great authenticity, that it's honest, it's meaningful, and it's not performative. You don't want to go viral for the wrong reasons, as my daughter would say. And so, so those are some of my kind of personal musings. Two final points. This is a theme that's been surfaced, embedding sustainability and inclusive supply chains at the venue level. When we think about Jillian having to scramble to find sustainable catering solutions and cutlery, what more of an attraction would it be to a venue that already has that embedded in their supply chain and just the way they run the venue and the way they do business? So for me, we talked about emissions, venues also have a real power beyond emissions. And so when sustainability, diversity in the supply chain are embedded at the venue level in procurement, catering, maintenance, services, the impact really does extend across multiple events. And that really does help create consistency for the planners, the market. It opens doors for diverse and local suppliers. It really strengthens community economic value and really sends a clear signal about what a venue in this century that we're living and warming in stands for. And so for me, it really isn't about one event. It's about how the asset is managed across its life. And I'll close with this thought. If demand drives value and event planners drive demand, we're clearly signaling that sustainability, resilience, inclusion are part of what defines a great venue, and making sure that we're doing that. Because if we are, and when that becomes a clear expectation, quite practically, venues don't make money if they're sitting empty, right? So venues respond, investment follows, and sustainability becomes something we build, not something we add on after the fact. And for me, that is how sport leaves a legacy worth of the next generation who will compete and attend and gather in these places. So that's the end of my monologue.
Thank you so much, Tanya. No, that's wonderful. Really appreciate you joining us. And in the interest of time, I'm going to invite Jill to come back online, and I have one quick question, follow-up question for each of you. And Tanya, maybe I'll start with you in that, we actually had a question in the QA function about, there's tensions around decision making, right? And sometimes, I think most of us on the call today believe in the why we would do this. At the same time, tensions surface in terms of cost, in terms of operational decisions, and those sustainability objectives. And so, how do we sort of justify and how do we manage those tensions and trade-offs as we see that we need places that last, we need places to play in terms of the fundamental why we would do this. So Tanya, maybe I could ask you to just speak kind of your favorite thought about how you manage those tensions when you're making big strategic planning investment decisions in your day-to-day.
Yes. So the tension comes up in so many of our client conversations. And the way we navigate it is really by starting with an understanding of the client's core objective, right? So what is that objective? Positioning their asset to attract customers, capital, and long-term returns. And so rather than treating it as a separate agenda, we look at it as the part of their core objective. And yes, we advise clients directly through sustainability services. And sometimes that's where tensions might rise because, again, it's being perceived as an add-on and an extra cost. And so there is a time and place for things that are emissions data, climate risk, transition planning. That does surface. But increasingly, the real value that we're seeing is embedding this mindset across all of our lines of business. So when we look at our engineering business, our commercial real estate division, that's brokerage, property management, capital markets, valuations, our clients don't want fragmented advice. That's sometimes where tensions rise. And so with that expectation of us being trusted advisors, helping them help ease the tension by helping them understand how operational decisions today will affect their future operating costs, asset resilience, investor expectations, market competitiveness. And so that really includes how assets, particularly venues in this context, are operated, procured, and just not how they're just built. So for us, we really bring down the tension by advising on this in a way that helps them really see the value creation from how the asset performs over time versus, oh my gosh, we have to spend all this money because we really want this event to be here. And so when cost pressures surface, which they always do, we'll focus quite pragmatically, sequencing actions in a practical way, prioritizing measures, that will reduce operating expenses or protect income, revenue, aligning capital investments where market demand is clearly moving. And back to my early point, you are the market. Where do you need it to go, and lean into that? You're the paying customer. And if that's what you want, then they will have to respond. Otherwise, the model's broken. And so what we're seeing is that assets that are embedding sustainability, like commercially, operationally, we are seeing them be better positioned to retain customers, attract those events, get the investors. And also, something that Jillian spoke about is the brand story, right? So, here you're going to have this sustainable event and the participants are being the little hummingbirds and they're sipping from their paper straws and their biodegradable cups, but then they look around and they're not seeing that in practice beyond. And nothing frustrates me than drinking out of a soggy straw when clearly they're not recycling the stuff properly. So for us, it's about framing it as not doing more, but doing better and helping our clients make decisions that work operationally and strengthen long-term asset value. And when we frame it in that, I hate to say it, but it's for profit. When we frame it in that way, again, it's becomes a no-brainer, right? So,
and I hear you, Tanya, that connecting the early planning to the legacy, the impact, the opportunity to attract investment in the case of event sponsorship, and the attendee experience, right? It all needs to be wrapped in one. Jillian, we had a comment in the chat about a challenge where there was a budget allocation early in the process around reuse, and maybe that decision didn't trickle all the way down to implementation. So, just thinking about when we're planning for events at scale, how do you make sure those early decisions kind of get locked in when you're budgeting, when you're planning, when you're committing to those principles? And you talked about some real examples of partnerships on the ground where you were able to make that real. How do you avoid having those maybe slip through the passing of hands? They might get missed.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes back to that governance piece. I'll try to make my answer kind of short and sweet because I know we're tight for time, but it's a matter of having sustainability embedded across the board. So when those decisions are being made to potentially, reduce the budget or move a budget in a different allocation, you have somebody on the team, whether it's your sustainability team or an internal champion in finance or legal or whatever element you're going to be looking at, that really understands the goals for the environmental or the sustainability strategy. The public facing piece is also a huge one, right? It's that accountability. So stating what you're going to do and then actually doing it and making sure that you report back on it is a piece that allows for budget allocation to stay within the sustainability portfolio. The example specifically, I feel like I want to learn a little bit more around what that person was actually asking. So I think it's Rachel. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what exactly that was, but I can dig in and get a response. But I think it's really making sure that it's ingrained across the board and having a really robust governance model that has sustainability in every single functional area, or at least part of the considerations in every single functional area. Does that answer your question?
It answers it for me, and Rachel said she's going to reach out to you. So thank you so much. It's time for us to wrap this portion of the event, but thank you both for being here. That concludes Lab 1, where we focused on how we set up for success and really embed sustainability. So I'm excited to now kick off Lab 2, which is all about making it real. A few reminders: the chat is open for dialogue. Please keep using it. Please do submit questions that you might have through the QA feature, and we're going to do our best to get to those. And we are going to be using Slido in the next segment. So get ready for some interactivity. So we are ready to dig in to Lab 2. In this lab, we begin to shift the focus from planning to operations and delivery. This lab is all about practical implementation, navigating constraints, making trade-offs, and delivering sustainability on the ground. Cette section est entièrement consacrée à la mise en œuvre concrète, gérer les contraintes, faire des choix, des compromis et mettre la durabilité en pratique sur le terrain. And I know we're working on getting the screen sharing up on the screen. There we go. In this first segment of this lab, we're going to hear from Isaac Owens-Frank, Sustainability Consultant for the 2027 Canada Games, and Wissam Gussaini, Building Automation Leader at ABB Canada. They're going to be focused on practical applications in transportation, energy, lighting. Isaac, we're going to invite you to join us on screen and kick us off. I have a request as the facilitator. Not surprisingly, we've got lots of great experts. We're a bit tight on time, so I'd love to hear your remarks, and then we'll move into some Q&A. So Isaac, over to you.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Elizabeth. And thanks everyone for being here. Really excited to talk transportation, as it's such an important piece of this puzzle we're talking about, with, how significant it is in terms of an event's overall environmental impact, but also how ingrained it is with the operations and logistics of the event itself. So my goal for today is to provide both some specific actionable strategies and initiatives to bring environmental consideration into your transportation discussions, but also give some higher level thoughts on how to go about creating those initiatives, specifically ones that work within the context of your events yourselves. So, of course, cars off the road is an environmental win, and cars out of the venue's parking lots, off the streets, is an operational win. So in practice, this conversation is a great example of how working towards sustainability goals can also help address other priorities and other areas of the event planning. So yeah, I think a big, sometimes under-considered element for this conversation is capitalizing on and adapting to the host area. So if we look at methods of doing this using the 2025 Canada Games in St. John's, Newfoundland, as an example, I was lucky to serve as the sustainability coordinator for the 2025 Games, and it's a very car-centric area. So, limited use and infrastructure of public transit saw us bumping up against a bunch of issues, such as not enough bus drivers in the area to add routes. And in that same vein, you can promote, walking and biking routes near venues on socials and on your websites. But if, locals don't have bikes, if it's low bike ownership in that area, or there's no rental bike options for visitors, the impact of that promotion is limited. So same thing with public transit, offering free rides is great, but if you can't add convenient bus routes, the impact is going to be limited. So in a situation like this, you have to get creative. But yeah, looking at the 2025 Canada Games in Newfoundland, what St. John's might not have is, an abundance of rental bike racks. But what they do have is extremely friendly people and a massive community on Facebook. So we used that to create a pretty widely used Facebook carpooling group for volunteers, something we definitely could have even taken the next step with and done for spectators too. So while that is a strategy I definitely recommend considering, the larger point here is that there's no one-size-fits-all approach for a sustainable transportation plan, and that advice or practical approaches for this conversation can only go so far without understanding the specific hosting community's situation. Knowing the community's profile in terms of transportation systems and people's transportation habits will really let you capitalize on that system. So whether it be, capitalizing on carpooling or biking in places like Quebec, where that's prevalent, or public transit in places like Toronto, that understanding of the system will help massively in building effective strategies to bring environmental consideration, environmental stewardship into the transportation discussion. So I'll get a lot more into detail regarding spectator travel later on as we go through this, but I also wanted to mention kind of from the participant or athlete transport side. And in this situation, you're likely dealing with more rigid restrictions in terms of where they need to be, the methods of getting there. So this is really where smart and early planning, as discussed earlier in this webinar, is extremely important. So, transportation is one of these key downstream factors that is really heavily influenced by things like scheduling and venue selection. So keeping that in mind will allow for a much bigger scope of influence here, specifically pertaining to participant and athlete travel. Another thing, I think a natural solution that people look to is making use of electric vehicles or electric buses, electric fleets. And in 2025 found a lot of success here. So we used EVs for our fleet vehicles, which ended up making a real positive difference in terms of our carbon footprint. But of course, it came with a number of logistical and financial challenges. So logistically, this introduces the challenge of, charging them, range anxiety, people being unfamiliar with using them. But on the other side of that same coin, you could also look at this as an opportunity in the sense that it could be a great opportunity to create a short and long-term environmental investment if you can work with a venue or the city to maybe cost share a charging station, specifically in a place that these groups have already been eyeing. So it's really reasonable to expect many venues to already be considering this or have already had discussions about adding charging stations. And same thing with municipalities, where a lot of these cities will likely have a list of locations where they plan on adding charging stations in the near future. So, if there's a way to work together to expedite this for the event, it could be a really great legacy piece for the event. But yeah, this and a lot of the conversation around transportation should also be about making decisions that have long-term impacts and really demonstrate the meeting point between environmental stewardship and an event's legacy. So whether that be, adding a charging station or adding bike parking to a venue, or trying to encourage people to, adopt the habit of using public transit. I'm sure I'll get more into this concept at a more granular level as we get into some of the questions for this section. But in the interest of time, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Isaac, for the short and sweet and meaningful remarks. That's just fantastic. I'll invite you to take a break from video, but don't go too far. We'll bring you back for a bit of a chat. And with that, it's my pleasure to invite Wissam on screen with me. Great to see you. Over to you.
Good day, everyone. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Kelly-Ann and Canada Games Council, as well as Profoundry and the whole team for convening this very practical sustainability webinar. I'm connecting from Montreal, and I'm more of a chess player than an athlete, but I promise you all that I do love cheering on games, especially the Canadian hockey. Let's start with a quick icebreaker. So you see on the screen a very old photo from a winter sport event, and I want you to use Slido, please, to guess the year. We'll give it like 15 to 30 seconds, and hopefully we see some answers. So please guess the year when that photo was taken. You could connect to a slide using the barcode or through the link posted on the chat. I can start. I see some guesses. $67, $71. There is someone that apparently won the jackpot. And so let's reveal the answer. The answer is 1948. Let's go back to the picture. So it's 1948, and I'm opening with this one for one reason. Brown Boveri, which is one of the ABB's predecessors, provided this high-frequency radio equipment to help broadcast live commentary from the snowy slopes to the whole world. I'm loving this because this is not really a technology or product story. It's a people story. Sports today reached more families, more communities, because the technology and infrastructure worked. So if I fast forward to today, the mission is still the same. We want to make the experience work for everyone, but the venues became more complex. So transport, energy, and lighting isn't anymore behind the scenes. They are the experience. Going to the next slide. Right, so this is, thank you. So here's the shift. I want to offer this specific shift. A major event is not anymore just a match. It's a temporary city. Today we speak about the evolution of smart stadiums and smart venues, and they all offer a 360 degrees experience, be it sports, broadcast, hospitality, security, connectivity, you name it. They are all running like a temporary city that has to perform perfectly on schedule. In Canada, they also have to perform perfectly on time, and also through real extremes like cold snaps, heat waves, sometimes occasional smoky air. So the comfort, air quality, resilience aren't nice to haves. They are part of the athlete performance, fan safety, and also your reputation. And I'll talk about sustainability a little differently. Yes, it is about reducing energy, reducing emissions, but for event leaders, the language is actually that drives the action is comfort, user experience, safety, cost control. Because if the building is uncomfortable, a product quality causes any failure, people won't call it an ESG issue. They will just call it a bad event. Next slide, please. So if you want to see or if you want the fastest emissions win, and one of the most overlooked, I would say, it's usually not a moonshoot project, to be honest. It's often invisible. It's how you operate what you already have in your facility. Lighting, air conditioning are major parts of it. And this is exactly the spirit of the Canada Games Council Sustainability and Action Planning Guide that you have a free copy in the chat. So please feel free to download that copy. And it pretty much focuses on the biggest levers. Measure what matters, make it part of the event plan, not just a side project. Now watch what will happen on the screen. When that someone moves through the space, you will see presence detection switches the systems on from idle to active. So lights are turning on, air conditioning will follow an occupancy mode instead of running flat out. And the moment the area is empty again, everything ramps back down. So you will see three practical moves in this space. Smart lighting, you start with thinking of lighting like stagecraft. The win isn't only switching to LEDs, but also creating minimal programming scenes and modes, dimming, zoning those lights to make best use of the experience. The HVAC or the air conditioning optimization as well is where you don't need the peak comfort everywhere for 12 hours. Precondition only spaces that you'll actually occupy. Last but not least is the smart scheduling and operational playbook, which I would call the COO move in this case, because it don't make sustainability or performance depend on someone remembering the right switch at the right time. You will make the venue the default to the right behavior every event, every time. Next slide, please. And here, my lens is pretty simple. You will see a complex technical diagram, but the idea behind it is this. We need to run the venue like one operating system, connecting all the subsystems in the facility. And the slide shows you how to enable this at a scale. You connect your assets, your sensors to a secure on-premise control layer on site. And then you connect this subsequently to a digital layer where you can apply advanced analytics, for example. And so what, or if we look at the so what, you will see that on the right side of the screen, you'll have three of them. First, adaptive event modes, because simply a concert is different than a hockey game, and a half-full event is different from a sold-out event. So event-specific modes would keep comfort consistent and will eliminate hidden waste. Predictive inputs is where this system becomes really proactive. We combine building and occupancy patterns with external data like weather, air quality, you name it, and we precondition only what you need when you need. And finally, effortless means it should be inclusive, because smart isn't just being efficient. You have to take care of the human side of this. It should be inclusive by design. A simple example is upgrading from motion detectors to presence detectors. So in washrooms, for instance, you can prevent lights from switching off if someone isn't moving much. Next slide, please. I'll say this plainly here. Resilience is sustainability. Modern venues, they power far more than field lighting and tens of thousands of devices. So how do you really ensure a single failure doesn't cascade into an incident? Watch this video, and then this will perfectly capture the idea.
What would happen if, during the final of the next World Cup, the floodlights that illuminate the pitch and the stands went out? And what would happen if the audio system at a concert stopped working? Someone might bitterly comment, that's the beauty of live broadcasts. But in reality, the consequences could be catastrophic. Economically for the parties involved, but also for the safety of the people who came to attend the event. Continuity of service can never be missing. But how can it be always guaranteed? Especially in stadiums that today offer any service and entertainment and therefore require significant electrical power. The key word is redundancy, meaning never depending on a single power supply or a single critical component. 2 incoming lines, 2 transformers, and 2 UPS systems that offer basic protection against power surges and uninterrupted power thanks to a backup battery. In other words, they are able to supply power to essential services when electricity is lacking. It's the same concept as a hospital, except that instead of patients, the people involved are athletes, spectators, and, in general, all event staff.
Thanks. So I'm not showing this as a product moment, by the way. I'm showing it because it captures the operating reality. In live events, continuity is safety, is reputation, and is revenue protection. Moving to the next slide, please. As soon as we make venues smarter, connected lighting, connected systems, we create a new class of risk. Cyber resilience becomes part of event continuity and public safety. This short clip is one of my favorites because it's actually the everyday reality. So let's watch it together.
It's the evening of a flagship match, a high-stakes occasion. As the teams arrive at the stadium, hundreds of staff are working to make the event possible. Among them is the operator in charge of reading the measurements on the main circuit breaker, the one that controls, first and foremost, the field lighting, and then also the audio systems, the production booth, and the LED walls. Everything is perfect, but it so happens that someone has decided to ruin the party. Nothing to do with Hollywood. In the world we live in today, this scenario is not that too far-fetched. This someone, having gained access to the same network, wants to change the protection parameters to knock out power supplies and create chaos. All it takes is some shared credentials or a service connection left too open. No sci-fi movie hackers required. Fortunately, no superheroes are needed either. Everything comes down to the configuration of the main circuit breaker, which becomes a device with assigned roles that limits external workers or malicious actors to read-only access, thus preventing tampering with the settings and ensuring the event goes smoothly.
That's why cyber is now an operations issue, not just an IT issue. And as you see in the video, the quick wins are surprisingly really practical. Role-based access, no shared credentials, and clear ownership of who can change what and when. Moving on to the next slide, I would love to zoom outside the venue and touch on the transport, which is actually the opening and the first impression of the user experience here. And this is a trust event. People won't remember the sustainability report. They remember how it felt to get into the event. And for leaders, this isn't just carbon, it's operations and inclusion. from curb to seat flow. And this slide shows you 3 moments: the arrival time, the game time, and the egress. Because once mobility goes as well electric on the parking lot, the parking becomes an energy system. If charging ramps, while the air conditioning, lighting, kitchens are all performing and peaking, you don't just pay more, you're creating a risk here. And the field lesson is simply, the problem usually isn't the charger, it's the unmanaged coincidence. With the next slide, I'll be closing with legacy, because for Canadian events in specific, the real test isn't what happens during the competition week, it's what still works 2, 5, 10 years later. I'll be candid here, like legacy rarely fails because people don't care. It fails because the operating model wasn't designed. We add equipment, but we don't always fund the skills, the maintenance, the data discipline, or the accountability to run it all well. So what you see in the slide on top is the core operating model of people and skills, assets and health, data and accountability. And those 3, once they are in place, you will get the wins at the bottom from fan experience, operational excellence, meaning less firefighting, and measurable energy reduction.
Thank you
my
so
closing
much.
note, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Wissam. I'm so
done.
sorry.
No problem. I'm done.
This has been wonderful, and I really appreciate both you and Isaac sharing your perspectives. And yeah, I would just invite Isaac to join me again on screen. In the interest of time, I have one follow-up question for each of you. And Wissam, maybe I'll start with you. We've seen some, and I also wanted to say, I know you said no superheroes required. I would argue that our event planners are in fact superheroes. So just wanted to say that. So having said that, I wondered, Wissam, if you could talk about, what are some of those practical measures that we can start to incorporate when we think about energy use and efficiency that don't overwhelm the organizing team, especially when we think about hosts that have, budget constraints, like real operating constraints. Is there, maybe one or two of your favorite pieces of advice you would give those folks?
Be honest, I would start with a saying I learned in Quebec: on lâche pas la patate, don't drop the potatoes, and don't give up when it feels like we can't afford this or we don't have the people. The truth is that most achievable wins are really small, plug and play, repeatable changes. So when it comes to practical realities here, the trick is to do fewer things on purpose and make them the default. So start with a quick baseline, I would say, select couple of KPIs, run the venue like I mentioned as a temporary city, but more importantly, try to also leverage on the boring wins, the quick wins. Simple changes here and there in lighting and HVAC can bring a lot of improvements. And don't forget to measure it. Use metering to measure the actual results on site. Try to pilot it, and before you scale and do it all. And I'd really like to add one point here, is that collaboration is a multiplier here. Like, we need to align venue operators, utilities, integrators, supplier, all together in the value chain. And that's what really helps if the venue team cannot really run it reliably on the game day, right? It does not make the cut. So we really need to leverage on the collaboration between all parties in the project.
Fantastic. Thank you, Wissam. Isaac, I know you did work on the 2025 games. Now you're working on the 2027 games. Would love to hear from you. What opportunities have you seen to really build and progress? What are what's a couple of lessons learned that you're applying as you move from one event to the next?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the ways that 2027 has really been able to build off 2025 is that now a lot of our environmental decisions are routed in real data. So Lab 3 coming up, we'll get more into detail about measuring impacts, but doing so has allowed 2027 to assess different sustainability strategies that were deployed for 2025 in terms of real CO2 reductions. And, this has been really eye-opening and helpful when we're looking at decisions, where to spend money, where to spend resources on environmental initiatives. We're able to see how much CO2 specifically was reduced from different initiatives, such as, using EVs and using spectator shuttles. So, this can then be evaluated with the costs and efforts required to organize and, focus on the most meaningful efforts in that sense. Something that we're finding when you look at it from that perspective is that such a massive portion of emissions come from spectator travel, specifically to the host city. So, it's one thing to know that's going to be the case. It's another thing to really see the data. And so we've learned that any strategies or initiatives to target that can make such a difference. So, if you can encourage any alternatives to flying, especially for those shorter flights, where taking the train or taking the bus is a viable option, that can make such a big difference. And another point here is that it's really feasible to be working with partners in this space to build a transportation plan. So whether it be working with the city to add bus routes, or working with rental bike companies, or working with organizations within the host city that promote city trails, lots of organizations that already focus on alternative transportation see these events as an excellent exposure opportunity. And, knowing this is a good opportunity for new first-time users, and that the first time using alternative transportation is often the biggest barrier.
Yeah.
I'd say working with these organizations to make changes in the short and long term is really realistic and beneficial for all parties. And then kind of getting back to that behavior piece, looking at spectator and fan transportation, I really want to focus on the idea that what we've learned is that incentive beats punishment, which is a pretty common, environmental psychology and public behavior concept. But in practice here, discouraging single-family vehicles with high parking costs and lengthy walks will, in many cases, just get people annoyed that are attending your event. And you really need to provide an incentivized alternative, whether that be free public transit or the idea that you'll get out of the venue or parking lot faster.
Yeah.
Both of which can really fit within real budget constraints. And, something else you can really lean on here is, lean on for free, is the power that, being part of a collective influences, encourages both spectators and participants to make environmentally conscious decisions and choices. So, whether it be the event breaking people's routines, whether it be social stigma, rooting for one common goal or team, people are looking to act sustainably at these events. And we as organizers really need to enable it logistically. And, transportation amongst food is one of the most clear examples of this.
It's fantastic.
You can make a real difference with things like effective promotion, reducing barriers rather than adding barriers.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. I think that it's such a great message to leave folks with for this segment, is that, we want to be part of something, right? We want to be part of a collective, and sport events are that moment to bring folks together in a positive way. So thank you both so much. We are going to move on to our next segment.
Merci beaucoup.
But thank you, merci beaucoup for being here with us. So in the next segment of this lab, we're fortunate to be joined by speakers, a good friend of mine, Tahira Endian, co-founder and chief experience officer at Strategy Table, who quite literally wrote the book, actually more than one, on designing and delivering events, and Chris Zielinski, senior director culinary at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, who has found ways to feed hundreds and thousands of people at one time and keep them happy. So they'll be sharing their experiences with on-the-ground event delivery. Tahira and Chris, not surprisingly, with such great content, we are a bit behind schedule. So I'll ask you both if you can tighten up your talk a little bit and still leave us with, I know, the meaningful high points that you've got. That would be wonderful. Tahira, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
All right. Well, starting with me is great. So why sustainable thinking for events matters to me? We share one planet and we all need to take care of it. So simple. And sustainability in events is not abstract. It's made up of dozens of daily decisions. So thank you, Elizabeth, for calling us event planners superheroes. I've been working with partners for decades to guide and support those dozens of daily decisions around sustainability and how they can fit into our event design. And I'm just going to really share some practical ideas with you. So on to the next, we're going to look at some really simple things, materials recommendations. So use less. So we don't always need quite as much as we think we need. And there's lots of ways of reducing waste, from, rental items that are multi-use to just not using something because you might not really need it. We'll look at some really clear examples of that. Life cycle planning for materials. So and this has already been talked about, so thinking about where it's going to end up, consulting with partners, and customizing less. So, and one of the other things to think about is that every time we're making an order, it has to come from somewhere. So how is it going to get from where it's going to you? So what is the, transportation that's going to bring it to us, and how can we help to eliminate or shrink some of those emissions that might be happening because of that? And sometimes that's thinking about, combining deliveries. Sometimes it's thinking about finding a supplier who can bring you something that's from closer, lots of different ways of doing that. So, and customization feels really special, but it does often create waste. I personally have a lot of extra water bottles all customized in my cupboard. So it's lovely to have them, but it's also, sometimes it can feel a bit excessive. So sometimes it's just as simple as removing the year from a sign if you're going to have a multiple years of the same event. So really simple ways of doing that. So looking at good sustainability planning, reducing cost, complexity quite often, and waste simultaneously. So on the next one, we'll look at some really core examples of this. So some circular use of ski wear specifically, and other types of banners and materials. So there is in Vancouver during the Olympics, and also at other events that have happened since, all around the city, there was fencing put up, and then they would make the fencing disappear by putting banners all across it. So those banners didn't go to waste. They went to a sewing collective of women who didn't otherwise have jobs, and they were able to sew and make all kinds of different materials out of that, lots of different bags and backpacks that then went back into the system as something that was helping to support them. So social projects. Same in the middle, another social project that is being done, and that one is being done in Stellenbosch, South Africa. And the third is a company called Birdie Blue, after Bluebird skiing days, but they're in Vermont, and they collect ski gear, old ski gear that's just going to be tossed and go to the landfill, and they make that into other projects as well. So I really think that thinking about here is that there's a global adaptability to this model. So there's hundreds of other examples of this. So when we're planning our materials, what materials are we throwing away that could have a second life, and how might that second life support? And there's a lot of examples of that. So we'll look at a couple of other examples. So one of the things on the next slide that's come up is, of course, the destinations and venues need to be supporting what we're doing. So it really is knowing what your destination already supports, and, as has already been said, getting that into the RFP and procurement stage. So it's really clear from the front what your expectations are, and really understanding then what can be met, what can't be met, or what could be met by the time of the event, as we've seen lots of excellent examples of already this morning. So again, what do your venues already support? And as Jillian said, the venues that they're working to have LEED certified by the end of the year, or or not even the end of the year now, in the next 4 or 5 weeks, to have LEED certified buildings. That is a huge step. So something that's going to happen because of these types of events. So, and then what organizations are on the ground to support those initiatives? So across these 3 examples, the first is an example from a local hotel in Vancouver, the Westin Bayshore, that has, instead of putting plastic water bottles in guest rooms, is using a partnership with Fill It Forward. So every time that you fill up your water bottle, you're supporting a cause. Rock and Wrap It Up is quite limited in its use in Canada, but it's basically a food recovery program, and that food recovery program works with 27 different sports franchises across North America. So the thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of pounds of food waste that they have been able to take and give back to community is absolutely incredible, and run by people who just, doing it on a volunteer basis pretty much, and are quite simply amazing. And the third is a refillable cup for refillable stations, not just water, but moving into wine, beer, and cocktails that BC Place is implementing. So that's going to be something really, it's great to see that we can take these. So, and apparently they are the first Canadian stadium to implement the reusable cup program. So some good examples of ways that we can find partners. And I know some of you are on this call today, so thank you as well for those I haven't mentioned, but I know that there's others that are also on this call. So examples of things that we can do really easily. On the next slide, and again, Jillian said this, which is part of the Canada Games Council sustainability strategy that just really also stood out and aligned with me, which is there are no sports on a dead planet. So if we look at the example in the red box, when they had the games, and this is not, I included this because this is not exclusive to the games. This is now happening to so many events. So they were tested by an Air Canada strike, by fires, extreme weather, and they overcame so many things. And there's an award right below that they won for that. A couple more examples of ways things are being reused. One of them is in Mexico, actually, this top one, which is a group called Second Kicks, where they are sending footballs, soccer balls for me, because I live in Canada. Welcome to Second Kicks. So where they're recycling soccer balls by giving them back into communities of need. And that cute little mouse is part of an initiative where they are making little nests from used Wimbledon balls, so in the UK. So again, different examples of ways that we can really rethink where things are going. Back to the dead planet, there's been quite a lot of reporting that has been coming out and some research that has been done in partnership with BCIT, where there is actually a 36-hour event sustainability program that I taught a lot, but what they're finding is that there has been an 86.5% increase in disruptions related to climate between 2023 and 2024 that's being reported for events. Storms and their effects, heat-related issues, wildfire, air quality. So we know that climate change is a confirmed factor in these. And weather has disrupted 57% of gatherings that were found to be intensified by human-caused climate change. So this is significant, and clearly every single step that people that are doing this work, it's really important that we keep doing this work. The next slide is looking at some of the sources that we have. So when we look at the event planning cycle, and I won't talk about this a lot just because it really has been talked about really well by the others. So we're not facing this challenge alone. There's lots of practical planning guides. So clearly the Canada Games Sustainability Guide is excellent. I work with an organization called IMEX, where we plan 2 large events each year and have worked really hard at, again, dozens and dozens of sustainable options and have put those into a really helpful guide for anybody who's working with sponsors, brand activations, exhibitions, all of the things that happen around your sporting events. There's a group called Better Stands, and Better Stands has lots of really useful tips on ways that we can create better stand initiatives and create more regenerative cycles from the products. And again, lots of good examples of what can be done there. And on the next slide, we'll be looking at the things how you can think about it. And so again, this is something many of you are already doing this work. You know this. There's, again, lots of good resources for this. But when we think about what we're doing, it's a journey. It's one step at a time we go forward and then try to bring people along with us in all of those ripples that we're creating. So what we need to do is to really just normalize this idea that we have stages of sustainability maturity and that starting it is just as important as leading it. So if we look at being a conserver, limiting and reducing waste, we're doing that pretty much across Canada quite effectively because we have support from many of our communities. If you're being a creator, and again, we've heard from so many of you today, so thank you so much, implementing programs that have social, economic, and environmental impact. And then ultimately, and again, many of you that we're hearing from, so being a catalyst, educating partners, participants, destinations, and that idea that we are hearing from architects, event planners, people who are working through all the stages of the venue and destination journey. It's really important. So we have to evolve over time, and no one gets to jump straight to catalyst, basically, I think is the key message there. So that is where I'm going to wrap up, because I know that we have to get some key messages out in a timely fashion today.
Thank you so much, Tahira. I really appreciate it, and wonderful to hear from one of my superhuman event planner friends and colleagues. It's my pleasure to invite Chris to join us on screen next. Tahira, don't go too far away. We'll bring you back for a bit of follow-up. And Chris, over to you. And I, greatly appreciate, not surprisingly, so many great speakers. We're a bit behind schedule, so would love to hear some of your key perspectives for the next few minutes. Over to you.
Awesome. Loving the conversation. It's fantastic. And looking forward to working with Jillian on this World Cup. It's going to be so exciting. Just want to give a few points on my success. So my success as sort of the head cheerleader at MLSE for all things sustainable is that, I have had the luxury of doing this over a long period of time. 16 years I've been working here. So, unlike some of the conversations we're having here, we're trying to stand up a single event. Some of these are more relatable in periods of time, but please, take it for what it's worth. There's some option. So thinking about whenever I'm trying to, change something or make something more sustainable, I'm always of the opinion that you need to bite it off in chunks. You can have an agenda, you can have goals, and you can have some stretch goals, but we've never been successful at taking everything at once and trying to do everything on the same day. For us, it's always been much easier to take one thing, try to work on that, in the set of goals, and then get to that one crossed off your list, work on the next one. And, sometimes that means it's an ongoing process. You got new targets that come up. For example, if I'm creating a new menu item for the concessions, I'm not just thinking about, what the food is. I'm thinking about where I'm buying the food from. Can it be a local product? Can it be something that is supporting a local farmer? But also, what container is it going into? Is it going into does it have to be served in a bowl? Does it have to be served on a plate? Does it have to be served in what we call a cant leak? And through that process, we were able to integrate compostable materials across the board on pretty much everything we sell, because I included the container in the recipe of what I was making. So it's, as simple as, just always considering all the factors and not going back after the fact and say, okay, what if we change this container to make it compostable? Because then people might say, you know what, I liked it in the container it was in the first time we served it. So, just always try to include it in your plan, have sustainable goals in your plan. Money conversation, that's one that comes up a lot. And certainly when you're dealing with, procurement departments and you've got, accountants involved, their job is to try to find the shortest path to the most money, which I understand. But I will say that, over the years, we've been able to influence a lot of good change, not just, by using sustainable products, but also within the market of having more vendors that are available to us with sustainable goods, because they know that's what we're shopping for. So, we've had some great examples over the years of things that we've done where we've pushed back on vendors and said, can you give us something that's coated in PLA instead of the PE coating? And you know what? It's amazing how quickly, when you say no, people will come back with something better. And, the PLA coating, as well as the vegetable-based coating that goes on the outside of maybe if anything that's branded or labeled, those things are out there in the market. They're way more available than they were even 2 years ago. So, happy to partake in that and make sure we're always moving forward. I apologize if there's sounds in the background. They're testing the Raptor pregame for tomorrow, and they just started doing it just now. So the buying power is another huge thing. Many years ago, we decided we were going to become partners with Oceanwise Seafood because we wanted to make sustainable choices. Our vendors really didn't have like a list of just Oceanwise approved products within their list, their product lists. And so we basically said, okay, we're not going to buy it. And because of our buying power and ability to influence, we've been able to, within a month, everybody came to me with a list that with Oceanwise products that were on it, because they didn't want to lose out on the business. Fast forward a year later, everybody's got a list. It's on the front of the list. It's the top of the list. It's the thing that you see first. So, we do affect some change when we make choices like this. And it's been, a tremendous amount of success for us. Another big one is our beef program. We are buying 100% Ontario local beef. I was tired of sort of the having everything shipped from Alberta. Sorry if there's anybody from Alberta here. I know you have great beef, but we have great beef here too. And we worked with a local vendor to, so get some of the best steaks. We go hand select the steaks to make sure that we're getting the best thing at grading time. And we have a tremendous relationship with the farmers and with, the companies that help get it to our door. But another great change and another great marketing tool for us when we're talking to our fans. They love to hear this story. They love to hear that we're supporting the local farmers. So, whenever it comes to making like changes, whether it's products or even post-game, food recovery, all that sort of stuff, I have a little bit of advice that I've learned over the years, and it's worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. You can give it a shot. One is I never make it political. Politics is such a hot mess right now. And, whenever we can make a change and just make it the normal and appropriate thing to do, it's a positive message. We don't need to, bring a big song and dance. That's other people that can do that work. But for me, I'm just trying to influence change and get it across. I believe very strongly in these things, but I don't make it a one side or the other conversation. We're doing what's right for everyone. And that's, and that's where I leave it. Also, I don't tend to hit people over the head with it. We're just trying to make sure that we're, getting the message out. I'm the one who has to tactically get it across to the staff, the thousands of people that work here, and make sure that they're all on board. You do that person to person. You don't do that by sending them a note or, putting something on a wall. You have to make them believe. And that's about finding your allies. And thinking about allies, Jillian, you are my ally because you have set a set of rules for us for the World Cup that we have to follow. And I love that. I love it when people give us a new agenda, even though we do a lot of the things that are already on the list. By you coming in and saying, you know what, we would like to have this be this and this be green and this be, it just gives me another platform to help make better decisions and decisions that will stick going forward when the World Cup is long gone. So, and just like Jillian, there's other people in the live entertainment business who have been up in our business about very same thing. So people like Billie Eilish, Depeche Mode, Neil Young, among others, Madonna, who have been very much about sending us a set of rules of how we need to operate, how we need to recover food. Love it. They are my allies. Likewise, our staff, we have to get them on side. When we started doing our major food recovery with Table de Chef, we weren't sure if people would view this as being extra work. To be honest, to scrape a food into the garbage is no different than scraping it into a container, put a lid on it, and now people get to eat. But, once we got in front of the crowd and the room and said to them, hey, you know what, this is what we're planning to do, their response was they stood up and applauded. They were extremely happy that we had made a decision to do something better with the leftovers and getting the city to be on board with it, Toronto Public Health, our lawyers, everybody, just to make sure that we were recovering as much as we could under the Good Samaritan Act. It's been a game changer for us. And again, some bold decisions had to be made, but you know what? We just normalized it. This is normal. This is what everybody should be doing. And it became part of our ecosphere here. So those are some of the things that really, I think, made a big difference for us. So actions, packaging, trying to get to 100% everywhere. We still have a little bit of our partner brands that haven't quite come on board with that yet, but we're working on them. But every other piece we have switched. Food sourcing, working with my procurement department, make sure they are making great choices, that they're socializing what we would like to see come to our door when it comes to, sustainable food, sustainable choices on seafood, supporting local farmers, supporting local folks. There's just a lot that can be done, to guarantee that we're getting what's local. So
thank you so much.
Pork, everything. So
yeah.
That's the end. That's all I had to say. But you know what? I hope it helps.
Thank you so much, Chris. Been super helpful, practical, and also inspiring. I'll invite Tahira to join me back on screen. I am going to keep the follow-up Q&A here pretty tight. Chris, I'll start with you. You talked about, in my words, needing to find those yes and solutions, right? We need to find the solutions that are good for the budget, they're good for the guest experience, and as much as we can, they're good for the planet. What's one piece of practical advice, like one your favorite example of something we can do at that nexus? And I'll ask you to keep it to kind of the 60-second, like your favorite example.
Make it normal. Whatever you're trying to do, you make it a part of our normal day activity. We want everybody to feel the same way about, whatever we're trying to change or make a difference with. We want people to talk about it. We want people to support it. And, in turns, it becomes great marketing material for our company that we can tell our fans. It's the same in, any other stadium. You just got to tell them that, you're doing the right thing, and people are very much on board, and they don't even mind paying more for your product, to be honest.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. Make it normal. Tahira, you mentioned the course that you teach at BCIT. That's really the next generation of superheroes, of event planners and sport organizers. What's one, practical message that you're imparting to your students? Sort of your favorite message that you look to leave them with?
They're normalizing it. They come in at the beginning and they're like, oh, how are we going to talk for 36 hours about recycling? Because that's what's in their mind with sustainability. And they leave. I watch them leave and talk to them and get feedback from them on what they're changing when they leave. And they change things at work, they change things at home, and they change things about how they view the world. And it's just lovely to see. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's an inspiring way to leave things. Need to make it normal. That next generation is making it normal. Thank you both so much for being here today and sharing your perspectives. We are now going to shift to our third and final lab, which will focus on showcasing impact. Nous passons maintenant à notre troisième et dernière section consacrée à la mise en valeur de l'impact. Before we do, quick reminders, you're using the chat, love it. Keep it respectful and keep it going. If you have questions, please put them in through the Q&A function. And we're going to roll right into this next lab where we will focus on showcasing impact, which will anchor us in effective measurement reporting, how we track impact, communicate results, and build trust and long-term outcomes. Everything we've been talking about leads to this moment. Our first segment focuses on incredibly important aspects of measuring and reporting and features Oliver Schofield, principal at Racing to Zero, and Adam Schwartz, director of corporate sustainability and reporting at Delphi. I'm going to invite Oliver to join me first. Oliver, not surprisingly, we've heard from some wonderful experts. We are tight on time, so really looking forward to your messages and hoping you can be real concise and to the point, and then we'll have a bit of a chat. Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. I will try to keep it tight. 5 minutes is not that long to speak about everything I want to, so I'm going to keep it really concise to some real world experiences that we've had, especially with the Canada Games and the Canada Games Council. First, I'd just like to say thank you for everyone tuning in today. I'm joining you from Vancouver on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I will start by introducing myself a bit in my background. That's going to lead into some of the work that we've been doing. While I was studying at UBC, I was studying resource conservation and a master's in business management. I was also playing on the men's national field hockey team, and I spent over 10 years playing with them, played over 100 matches in the Tokyo Olympics, and I now sit on the Canadian Olympic Committee's Athletes Commission, which really gave me this great insight into the Canadian sports system. Through all of that and through that insight, it kind of really allowed me to merge my passions for sustainability and environmental stewardship with the sporting landscape and see how we can affect change like we're speaking about today. While I was competing with the national team, I got connected with a group of other Canadian Olympic athletes who were also passionate about sustainability, and together we formed what is now Racing to Zero, which is the company that I helped co-found and lead. And we are a full suite sustainability consultancy working specifically with sports organizations to help them understand and mitigate their environmental impacts. We do greenhouse gas measurement, which is obviously the topic of today, as well as strategic planning, implementation, and educational pieces. And we've had the pleasure of working with a number of different players across the Canadian sports system, including many NSOs, PSOs, destination marketing organizations, really tapping into the cities' role in how we host events, and large-scale events like the Canada Games. I will focus now on the experiences that we've had with the Canada Games. So we've had a great relationship with the council itself over the past few years, helping them measure their annual emissions and report on those, as well as implementing against their strategic plan into the Canada Games. And so we worked with very closely and collaboratively with the research team out of the University of Toronto for the 2025 games in St. John's. And so we not only did we measure the actual emissions, we also helped produce a framework that can be used at future editions of the games to hopefully make all of this quite a bit easier for future hosts. We've now segued that into working closely with the 2027 host society for the Quebec City Games, following that very same framework that we put together, learning from the experiences. We didn't get everything right the first go around, so learning from them, enacting a bit more change too. And so one key difference that we have noticed is for the 25 games, we came in a bit later on in the process. We measured the games times and missions with all the planning that goes on before it and produced a report. And that's great. We have a report now and we built the framework. But with the 27 games, we've managed to join the host society earlier on in the process. And what that's allowed us to do is produce a pre-games emissions estimate. So based on everything that we project to happen at games time, we produced a pre-games estimate. This really showed us and allowed us to identify emissions hotspots and allowed us to do some detailed analysis on where potential savings are, and gave that to the host society along with a 40-point greenhouse gas reduction plan. So now they have 40 recommendations that they can take away in the 12 months leading up to the games, with detailed analysis of how much potential emission savings there can be, potential costs they can put to it, and really pick and choose the ones that are most effective and most feasible for them. Some are a bit more blue sky thinking, but we had to include those as well. And I think this is going to be really successful. So the 27 Host Society is already prioritizing sustainability at the guidance of the Canada Games Council, but they also have a really unique relationship with the city of Quebec City, which I think is leading to a ton of success. Because the city is prioritizing this, really pushing the host society to include sustainability in an integral part of the hosting process, that's allowing it operationally to be a lot more integrated. And through the city, we're also helping produce a legacy piece, a resource that can be used by future events of any scale within the city specifically, that will then, as I mentioned, create that legacy and create ongoing benefits. Finally, just before I wrap up, is one final key to success we've noticed through this whole process is having that dedicated sustainability coordinator. So Isaac for the 25 games, Gabrielle for the 27 games. From the host society, it just makes it so much easier. So not only can they operationalize this and really bring it to the right people inside the organization, they also allow, when you're working with external consultants or third-party service providers, they allow that sharing of information of that day-to-day and the ins and outs that just better integrates sustainability throughout the entire planning process. So just to wrap up, I'm really happy to be working with the Canada Games Council, developing these types of frameworks in what is still a relatively emerging field, especially here in Canada.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Oliver. I'll invite you to take a break from camera, but don't go too far. We'll bring you back for a quick question or two. And it's my pleasure now to invite Adam to join me on screen. Adam, my friend and colleague, wonderful to see you. And as I've mentioned, we are tight on time, so I will ask you, Adam, to keep it short and sweet and to the point. I know that you will. Appreciate you. Over to you.
Absolutely. I'm going to go quick. Thanks, everyone. As a former national swimmer, it's genuinely an honor to be here today among Olympians and fellow champions of sport across Canada. I'd also like to quickly acknowledge that I am joining from Treaty 7 territory in southern Alberta. So let's get into it. I want to leave you with some practical steps that you can take to measure sustainability and report on it. In my experience, and has been articulated on this call, most organizations don't struggle with why sustainability matters. They struggle with how to operationalize it. And most people think sustainability is purely environmental, but it's much broader than that. And if you think about sustainability through a business lens, it actually becomes more actionable and useful. So everything I'm going to talk about today builds from the idea that sustainability as a business, think about sustainability as a business and operational lever, not a separate initiative that's tacked on to the side. So I think all organizers and organizations need to start around determining what matters to you. The biggest mistake I see is that events and organizations try to measure everything. A better starting point is to anchor yourself in purpose and context. So what are you trying to achieve? What's driving it? What's your mandate? Who are your stakeholders? And what are the expectations of you? From there, ask, where are the decisions being made in your event? Typically, that's around budget allocation, procurement, vendor selection, and how the event is designed and operated day to day. Then ask a simple question: where would better information actually change a decision? That's your filter. In practice, this narrows to things like cost, what your stakeholders want, and what you can actually control. It's identifying a few high leverage areas where measurement can drive action. And importantly, most importantly, right size it to what's feasible. You don't need to solve everything at once. A step forward done well is better than trying to do everything and stalling out. So you need to pick a few key performance indicators. And once you know what matters, that is a lot simpler. Remember, you're not building a long list of problems you're going to solve. You're picking 3 to 5 metrics max that are tied to real decisions related to the event or what you're working on. So for example, waste or diversion rates can inform vendor requirements and operations. Energy or resource use influences venue selection and scheduling decisions. Local or responsible procurement can shape your supplier choices. But the key step most people miss is that your KPI, every KPI, needs to be operationally clear. What is the KPI? Why does it matter? And who actually owns that KPI? If those aren't clear, the KPI won't stick. And at a minimum, every KPI should be linked to 2 things: a decision lever and an owner. Remember, the goal isn't about reporting, that comes after. It's about changing behavior. Also, let's be honest, simple beats perfect. You're far better off with directional, repeatable data year over year than trying to build a perfect system. So I'm going to give you a quick example from my time in recreation, managing Sukhumi Lake, a small outdoor recreation spot in Alberta. My team and I were tasked with building a recreation business from scratch under a revenue mandate from the government, strict environmental standards inside a park, and a tight budget. We built a multi-revenue model based off of concession, retail, programming, and various lessons, and focused on utilization, cost efficiency, and experience as our main drivers. So that meant that what mattered to us came down to 3 things. 1, cost control. 2, the visitor experience. And then 3, environmental performance, which, as a side note, we framed as a lever for cost efficiency, not as a trade-off that comes after. So we tracked a small set of operational metrics: waste, spoilage, participation and utilization, and basic purchasing systems. Each one was tied to a decision. So for example, we saw in waste that food and retail was driving both cost and environmental impact. So we simplified our menu. We adjusted ordering, we reduced packaging. And that reduced our disposal cost, improved margins, and lowered our footprint, all from one data point. So interestingly, the hardest part wasn't necessarily capturing data. The hardest part was the challenge of what to actually measure. And early on, we tried to track too many things, too many data points, and we were trying to satisfy too many objectives. So we took a step back and decreased some of those metrics. So I see Elizabeth's back. I'm going to leave you with some practical advice here as I wrap up my talk. I think it boils down to starting with a small step: 3 decision useful linked KPIs, not 100, not 15. Be clear on who, how, and the ownership behind the data. Build measurement systems within existing workflows, not as a separate system. Focus on what you can control first, and then expand. It's same constraints in sports as it is with my example: temporary environments, multiple vendors, limited control. So again, the goal here isn't perfect measurement. It's about having just enough insight to make better decisions when and where it counts.
Thank you so much, Adam. I'm going to invite Oliver to join us back on screen. And while he's doing that, question for you, and in the interest of time, I'm going to have to ask you both to give kind of your favorite 60-second example in response. But Adam, starting with you, it's easy to overcomplicate, right? You alluded to that. What is one piece of advice you would give to organizers to avoid overcomplicating and really, as they're starting their journey, do this well and stay focused?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I highlighted it in my talk, but just to recap, really important. This is so important. Don't try to measure everything. Organizations are trying to solve all of the problems. Events think that there's a million things they have to monitor, but really just don't build a long list of topics. Don't involve complex frameworks, because then nothing sticks. And then don't over-engineer everything. Start with what you can, small steps. Focus on decision-linked metrics. Embed within what you're doing. And most organizations won't fail because they did too little. They stall really because they tried to do too much too early.
Yeah. It's great advice. Oliver, similar question to you. What advice would you give hosts that want to start? And we want to encourage them not to try to do everything at once. Again, sort of your 60-second favorite piece of advice for those folks.
Yeah, I think especially from like an event standpoint and a one-off event, measure the big categories. So transportation, waste is a very tangible one. Energy usage we've heard about today. But you're not alone in all of this. As a couple examples for transportation, if you're trying to get spectator travel data, if your event's commissioning an economic impact survey, they're already asking those same questions. You can get that information collaborating with someone else. For energy data, every single venue, especially stadiums, has a facility manager it is their job to know how that stadium or arena or venue runs. And they will know where the inefficiencies are because that's where it costs them the most money each month or each year. So work with them. It's really giving utility data. Waste, speak to your waste management provider. So yes, measure the big ones, but also know that you're not alone and engage with the right people to make your life easier.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. Really wonderful to hear from you on how we can do that measurement and reporting and do it well. I am going to move us on to the final segment of our webinar where we focus on critical aspects of building trust and leaving a positive legacy. Our speakers for this segment are Maxime Barabé, Director of Planning and Governance for the 2027 Canada Games Host Society, and we'll also be joined by Tracy Bilski, who's the President of the Whitehorse 2026 Arctic Winter Games Host Society. Maxime, merci beaucoup. I'll turn to you first. And as you know, we're tight on time, so would love to just hear your favorite and most impactful perspectives here for the next 4 or 5 minutes. Over to you.
Merci, Elisabeth. Donc, on voulait mettre en valeur certains des aspects les plus importants des Jeux du Canada 2027. On a la chance d'avoir un budget pour les investissements en immobilisation aux Jeux du Canada. Donc, on l'a utilisé évidemment dans une perspective sportive, mais également dans une perspective d'amélioration des installations de façon permanente. Les exemples que vous voyez à l'écran, on en est fiers. Vous voyez le site du Relais qui est le site de ski acrobatique. C'est un endroit qui accueille déjà des Coupes du monde, donc c'est un site renommé. Toutefois, on l'a amélioré de façon significative par des travaux d'excavation qui font en sorte que non seulement le site est plus sécuritaire et meilleur sur le plan sportif, mais on réduit aussi de 50% la quantité de neige artificielle qui est utilisée pour ce site-là. C'est plusieurs milliers de mètres cubes de neige de moins à chaque année qui sont utilisés. Le site de Stoneham que vous voyez également, même chose, des travaux d'excavation, donc un site de haut niveau qui attire des compétitions de niveau national et international déjà. Mais avec les travaux qu'on a fait, la quantité de neige est réduite de 40% sur ce site-là. Donc, c'est des améliorations majeures qu'on souhaitait mettre en évidence parce que ça sera le cas pour les 10, 20, 30 prochaines années que ces sites-là seront améliorés. Donc, si on peut avancer à la prochaine slide. On a mis de l'avant également l'accessibilité universelle. Pour nous, j'ai aimé ce que M. Schwartz a dit auparavant. On a une vision vraiment large du développement durable et pour nous, l'accessibilité universelle en fait partie. Donc, à même notre budget d'immobilisation, on s'est gardé une enveloppe pour les travaux d'accessibilité universelle. Vous envoyez un exemple à l'écran. Donc, ce que vous voyez, c'est le site des futures finales de hockey masculin et féminin aux Jeux du Canada 2027. C'est un aréna important qui a plus de 4000 places. On fait des travaux pour faire en sorte qu'il y a des salles de bain accessibles, qu'il y a une plateforme accessible pour les spectateurs également. Donc, c'est des investissements significatifs. Et ce n'est qu'un exemple parce qu'on a 6 sites que nous allons améliorer spécifiquement au niveau de l'accessibilité universelle dans le cadre des Jeux. Donc, on est fiers d'avoir mis ça de l'avant et non seulement parce qu'on a des athlètes en parasport, mais aussi parce que plusieurs de nos bénévoles sont des gens un peu plus âgés. C'est 18 jours de bénévolat, donc c'est beaucoup de gens qui sont à la retraite. Donc, l'accessibilité universelle devient vraiment un facteur important pour nous. On voulait mettre de l'avant quelques-unes de nos initiatives également. Donc, toute l'équipe, le 29 mai prochain, on va aller planter des arbres. Donc, avec Québec Carbone, qui est notre fournisseur, on va travailler à compenser une bonne partie des émissions de gaz à effet de serre dans le cadre des Jeux du Canada 2027. On a mis en place une politique pour nos commanditaires, mais aussi pour nos fournisseurs d'approvisionnement durable. Donc, on est prêt même à accepter une soumission qui est un petit peu plus coûteuse jusqu'à un certain niveau pour un fournisseur qui a des critères de développement durable démontrés. Donc, pour ça, on est fiers de cet aspect-là qu'on a mis en place. Il y aura des mesures très pratiques dans le cadre des Jeux et on espère que vous serez là à Québec pour les vivre. Mais par exemple, on ne distribuera aucune bouteille de plastique à aucun participant, aucun média, aucun VIP, aucune bouteille. Donc, les gens doivent amener leur gourde, leur tasse de café, utiliser des verres réutilisables. On a un comité de développement durable et LEG qui travaille avec nous. Et on a, Oliver l'a mentionné un petit peu plus tôt, développé un cadre que la Ville de Québec va utiliser pour les futurs événements. Donc, on s'est fait un plan de réduction des gaz à effet de serre. On ne pourra pas l'implanter au complet, on doit faire des choix. Toutefois, toutes les actions qui sont là sont fort intéressantes, puis ils vont être transmises évidemment aux prochaines sociétés hôtesses des Jeux du Canada 2029 et 2031. Donc, on espère que ça sera intégré dans le cheminement critique du Conseil des Jeux du Canada et que ça sera payant pour les prochaines sociétés hôtesses. Mais assurément, on va mettre en place les actions qu'on peut mettre en place à ce stade-ci. Et la dernière slide, s'il vous plaît. Simplement, vous mentionnez que les Jeux du Canada, c'est un événement important, mais malgré tout, il est dépendant des propriétaires d'installations. Donc, on a une bonne collaboration de leur part, mais toutefois, on est dépendant d'eux. On veut mettre en place plein de mesures en termes d'économie d'énergie, de stations de remplissage de bouteilles d'eau et ainsi de suite. Mais évidemment, on est dépendant du bon vouloir de ces propriétaires-là. Donc, on développe des bonnes relations, mais quand même, ça reste un défi. Et l'autre élément, c'est on doit prioriser. On doit choisir des actions qui ne sont pas trop coûteuses. J'ai aimé ce que M. Schwartz a dit auparavant. On ne peut pas tout faire. On doit choisir. On a des ressources humaines, du temps et des moyens financiers limités. Donc, on doit faire des choix. Malgré tout, et on espère que ce sera les bons choix. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Maxime, d'avoir partagé votre expérience. Thank you so much. And a theme we've heard, we can't do it all. We have to make some choices. So appreciate that. I'm going to next invite Tracy to join me on screen. Maxime, you can take a break from the camera, but don't go too far. We'll bring you back for some wrap-up thoughts. Tracy, really looking forward to hearing from you. Our timing is tight. Your presentation and your perspectives are super powerful. Over to you for the next 4 to 5 minutes to help take us home.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'll keep things concise. My name is Tracy Bielsk. I'm joining you from the traditional lands of Kwanlundon First Nation and Ta'an Council up in Whitehorse, Yukon. I have a 30-year career in sport. We just hosted an Arctic Winter Games. This was my 20th Games. I have 9 Canada Games, 11 Arctic Winter Games, and some Western Canada Games under my belt. And so I'm happy to share today some of the lessons that we've learned from hosting a lot of these events or some of these events in Whitehorse. The climate change is warming Northern Canada 3 to 4 times faster than the global average. So this is a really important conversation for us. Really quickly, if you just go to the next slide, Arctic Winter Games are multi-sport games where youth aged 12 to 19. 2,000 youth from across the circumpolar north join us every 2 years. It started in 1970. And the regions include Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, Alaska, Northern Alberta, Nunavik, which is Northern Quebec, Greenland, and the Sapmi region, Denmark, Finland, and Sweden. And this really is the Northern Olympics for these kids. And we just hosted these games for the 7th time, March 8th to the 15th. And for a community of 42,000 people, we are quite experienced in hosting events. And we hosted the 2007 Canada Games. It was the very first time it was hosted north of 60. And so that's my first example of when it comes to decisions that we made this time around to use our local landscape, to use our local people and stay unique, which creates pride and in place and true legacy from games. So if you just flip to the next slide. So in 2007, we did not have an indoor facility large enough to host 2,000 athletes and thousands of spectators and special guests. So in order to create a memorable and beautiful production, we erected a massive temporary tent structure in 2007, which we pumped heat into for 2 weeks, and from opening to closing, and the cost was large, but the environmental footprint was larger. And we knew that youth expected more from us today. So we made a decision to host the ceremonies outside. We wanted to showcase our landscape and traditional lands. We could use the air in our surroundings. You see it along the riverside there. And we also wanted to show smaller jurisdictions that they also could host an Arctic Winter Games or a large sporting event, even if they don't have these large structures in place. And so it was extremely successful. If you just want to flip through the slides, you can see all the thousands of people. We did not ticket the event. So we wanted to reduce any barriers for access for the community. We had athletes parade down the street. You can keep flipping through, thank you. Parade down the street so that they could be seen by even more community members. But it was a beautiful production, and we were able to showcase our natural landscape. Now, it didn't come without the risks of cold weather. You can flip through, thank you. We did have a backup plan, but thankfully we didn't have to use that backup plan. These kids are from the Arctic, so we leaned into that possibility that they would enjoy this, and they really did. So we saved all of this. We felt better about, not creating that environmental footprint that we did in 2007. That was a big lesson for us. If you want to flip through to the next slide, this is when it comes to sustainability, for us, it's not just environmental. It definitely comes with relationships and people. And so I wanted to make sure, now that I'm making my presentation really concise, is that when it comes to legacy for games, we really do need to focus on relationships. And it was extremely important for us to commit to authentic First Nation engagement right from the very start. So the Arctic Winter Games does already have culture baked right in, but it's up to the hosts to determine the best opportunities for inclusion that are meaningful to our local First Nations. And so we offered the opportunity for the two chiefs to light the torch and to represent their First Nation. It was extremely special to them. We also made sure that our meetings with them started right from the start, and that we continued to keep everyone communicating. We communicated with them often. We made sure that they were aware of all of the opportunities to be able to display their culture and their traditions. And for us, this means sustainability when it comes to hosting sport events in the Yukon. And we have an extremely good relationship with our Yukon First Nations. And this is how you do it. You just create relationships with people. You can go to the next slide, please. That was the parade. And the next slide. There were also some other things that we did. We made sure in games, there's a mission 1 and a mission 2 meeting. We combined those into one big M. So there are people traveling from all across the circumpolar north. So we wanted them to just travel to us once. We took advantage in advance of that of video facility tours, and we reduced our footprint in that way. We used, computers and office equipment that were pre-used. One other big decision that we made that we learned from 2007 and also from other Arctic Winter Games is we see a lot of waste with bunk beds. And so when we have bunk beds, what happens is then we're transporting those, they're getting broken, we're trying to sell them to next games and such. So we decided something that Maxime said, to give gifts to athletes that were long-term and sustainable for them. So we actually had cots and then thermarests or mats on top of those. The kids were really comfortable. We had 2,000 of them, and we gifted them to the athletes. These are all Arctic kids. They all camp. And then we sold a lot to the emergency services and future Arctic Winter Games. They're easy to store. So that's something that we did that we think made a big difference when it comes to sustainability. There are other examples, but I know we're really tight, Elizabeth. I know you have some questions for us.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I mean, I've been looking forward to your talk all webinar because I know how impactful those moments you created were. I'll invite Maxime to join us back. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask just one sort of wrap-up question of each of you, and I'll ask for sort of your 60 seconds or less, second ou moins response. Maxime, I'll start with you. I would love to hear what's one important learning maybe that you have, personal or professional, when we think about building and maintaining trust. Like, what is the one thing that sticks with you? Maxime, to you first.
It's interesting because about 2 years ago, we did a survey of all the organizations in the Quebec City area, tourism, sports, cultural, and everything. And we asked them what they saw as a vision, as a mission, as legacy. And I think the main thing is say what you're going to do, communicate it, and then make sure you do it. And also, second thing would be realistic. I put some emphasis on that. Like, we have limited resources, but let's be realistic, but then do it. And maybe the last thing would be that people talk when we made the survey about pride and collaboration and everything, and those became our values, but how do you do that? So we put in some indicators, and at the end of the games, we're going to survey the population and see, is there really more pride and everything? So yeah, that would be my answer.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maxime. Tracy, same question over to you. One learning.
Yeah, thank you, Maxine. That's pretty much exactly what we had said too, but also to be very truthful, to be authentic to yourselves, to be unique with your jurisdiction. So we're never really good at trying to be anybody else. And so make sure that you look at who you are, what do you have to offer as a community? And then, yes, be realistic in how you can make these small differences. And one small example that I'll give, because I think it can really be included in a lot of events. There's a lot of event planners on this call, but one thing that we did was in recognition of Truth and Reconciliation and Call to Action 91 in particular, we partnered with our local First Nations and we created a program called Mobile 91. So they had a van. It was a group of Yukon First Nation women, and they took their elders, they took pins, they took t-shirts, and they took this message to the community and to the kids. Because the kids don't go to these types of talks. You have to take it to them. And they modernize the conversation about Call to Action 91. And I know that had a really big impact and a really big legacy on our community, but also on these 2,000 Northern kids. So just find little examples like that speak to who you are and how unique you are.
Thank you both so much. Really powerful closing and final segment for our webinar today. We are now drawing to the close of this wonderful session. Nous arrivons déjà à la fin de cette belle session. I'm going to invite Kellyanne Paul to rejoin me on screen, President and CEO of the Canada Games Council. Kellyanne, we are wrapping up here. It has been a wonderful 3 hours. Would love to sort of ask the same question of you, 60 seconds or less. What has been your favorite learning today? What's the favorite thing you've heard? I know it's hard to choose. It's like choosing your favorite kid, but over to you.
I think the actual answer to that question is a non-answer. It's that everyone is doing great things. And, circling back to what Elder Dan Ross opened with, like the hummingbird example, everyone is doing what they can. And I think, as you can see, everyone, sport is an important landscape where people build connection, they share with each other, and our tools, opportunities, and resources are available to share with the community. And I just really want to thank everyone who participated, everyone who joined, all of our speakers for their preparation and their messaging. We are all in it for the right values-based reasons. And there isn't a single thing that I didn't learn from all of the different presentations. So thank you. Merci à vous tous.
Thank you, Kellyanne, for your leadership and for organizing us and bringing us together today. And I guess, final question is what's next? Where to from here? And I think we have some closing remarks, but over to you if there's any final things you want to share before we throw to the wrap up.
No one can say it better than our chair, Katrina Leydon. So I do believe she addresses that in her address here, Elizabeth. I'll thank you to everyone. And you'll hear from our chair now, Katrina.
Hi, everyone. Bonjour. Thank you so much for attending our Sustainable Sport in Action webinar. I'm looking forward to seeing the continued action this will spur from coast to coast. Que vous représentiez un grand organisme multisport ou un club communautaire, et quel que soit le budget de votre prochain événement, nous espérons que vous repartirez convaincus de pouvoir contribuer positivement à votre échelle. In addition to recorded clips from this webinar, which will be shared on our Canada Games YouTube channel, the Sustainable Sport in Action Planning Guide and technical companions are also available to everyone on our website. We really hope you leave today feeling not only inspired, but empowered to create change. Le développement durable est un pilier important du travail que nous accomplissons en tant qu'organisme sportif et le CGC s'engage à collaborer avec l'ensemble du secteur pour en maximiser les retombées. Thank you to our incredible speaker lineup today, the Canadian Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee, and especially our partner in delivery, Profoundry, for blending the sport and corporate sectors. We are grateful for your role in bringing this to life. Our free Sustainable Sport in Action resources also do a really excellent job of capturing best practices and packaging them in a way that's thorough but user-friendly. I'd encourage everyone to look through our planning guide, and if you want even more detail, the technical companion will have everything you need. C'est toujours un grand plaisir que le Conseil des Jeux du Canada collabore avec des partenaires. Nous savons que la réussite ne se trouve pas en silo. Merci d'avoir été parmi nous. Merci encore à Elizabeth et tous les membres de Profoundry d'avoir travaillé avec nous sur ce webinaire. Nous n'aurions pas pu réaliser tout ça sans votre soutien et bien sûr sans le soutien financier apporté par le COC et le CIO. Stay tuned for more information about Green Sports Day, which will be on October 6th, and mark October 15th in your calendars when we will light the flame to launch the 2027 Canada Games Torch Relay. The 2027 Canada Games themselves take place in Quebec City starting on February 27th, and we can't wait to celebrate 60 years of the Canada Games, back where it all began. Merci à tout le monde. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, to all our speakers for your insights and leadership. Thank you to our participants for engaging so thoughtfully. On behalf of the Canada Games Council and Profoundry, thank you and take good care. Have a great rest of your day. Bye now.